There are places in the galaxy where being born isn't a gift. It's a sentence. Korriban was one of those places. This wasn't some backwater planet where life was just hard. This was a graveyard. A tomb world where the Sith had been burying their dead for thousands of years. The temples stood like broken teeth against a red sky. The wind carried dust that tasted like ash. And somewhere deep in those crumbling ruins, in a chamber that smelled like death and forgotten time, a child was born. His name was Darth Wyyrlock III. But names don't mean much when you're born into a legacy that's older than most civilizations. The kid didn't cry. Most babies scream when they enter the world, but not him. Maybe he already sensed it. Maybe some part of him understood that crying wouldn't help. That weakness wouldn't be tolerated. That this place didn't care about comfort or safety or any of the things a child should expect. The air in that chamber was cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver. The kind that gets into your bones and stays there. His mother held him once, just once. Her hands were cold. Her face was blank. She looked at him the way you'd look at a tool you're inspecting before a job. No warmth, no recognition, no maternal instinct. She studied his face for maybe 10 seconds, then handed him off to a servant and walked away. That was it. No promises, no lullabies, no gentle words about the future. Just cold stone and colder silence. She disappeared down a corridor and he never saw her again. Not because she died, but because that's just how it was. Attachment was forbidden. Love was weakness. And in the Wyyrlock bloodline, weakness was death. The room where he was born wasn't a nursery. It was a ritual chamber carved from black volcanic rock, the kind that seemed to absorb light instead of reflect it. Torches burned along the walls, but they barely pushed back the darkness. The flames flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, faces twisted in agony. Bodies contorted in positions that shouldn't have been possible. Words written in languages that had been dead for centuries, maybe millennia. Symbols that seemed to shift and crawl when you looked at them too long. This wasn't a place for babies. This wasn't a place for anything living. But then again, Wyyrlock wasn't supposed to be a baby for long. His father stood at the edge of the room, Darth Wyyrlock II, a tall figure draped in dark robes that seemed to blend with the shadows. He didn't hold his son, didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge the birth with so much as a nod. He just watched, silent, still, like a statue carved from the same stone as the temple. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but you could feel his eyes, cold, calculating, measuring. He didn't need to say anything. The boy would learn soon enough. Words were tools, silence was power. And in the world of the Sith, power was everything. The Wyyrlocks weren't warriors. They didn't conquer planets or lead armies into battle. They weren't the ones standing at the front lines with lightsabers blazing. They were something quieter, something more dangerous. They were keepers, scholars, historians of the dark side, masters of ancient languages and forgotten rituals. They stood beside emperors and whispered in their ears. They translated texts that could drive lesser minds to madness. They performed ceremonies that bent reality itself. They didn't take the throne. They controlled it from the shadows. They were the voice that guided the hand that held the blade. And now that responsibility had fallen to this child. From the moment he was born, his life was already mapped out. There was no room for deviation, no possibility of choice. He would study, he would learn, he would become what the bloodline demanded. There would be no childhood, no innocence, no discovery of self, just duty. cold, unrelenting duty. The temples of Korriban became his home, not home in any warm sense, but the place where he existed. The tombs of dead Sith Lords became his playground. Places where most people would lose their minds became his classroom. The whispers of the dark side became the only voice he heard, not his mother's voice, not his father's, just the constant, low hum of ancient power that saturated every stone. He grew up surrounded by death, by monuments to monsters who'd ruled galaxies and turned to dust, by the echoes of power that still clung to the walls like stubborn ghosts refusing to leave. Most kids would have been terrified. Most kids would have broken within weeks. But Wyyrlock wasn't like most kids. He couldn't afford to be. He learned to walk in halls where ancient kings had been murdered. He took his first steps over bloodstains that were older than the Republic. He learned to speak in the Sith tongue before he could speak basic. His first words weren't mother or father. They weren't hungry or tired. They were incantations, commands, phrases pulled from scrolls so old that touching them made the air hum with something you couldn't see but could definitely feel. Dark side energy, thick and heavy, like invisible smoke. He was taught that fear was weakness, that attachment was a chain around your neck, that love was poison that would destroy you from the inside out, slowly and completely. And he believed it. Because what else was there? Nobody ever told him anything different. Nobody ever showed him kindness. Nobody ever suggested there might be another way to live. By age 5, he was reading texts that would have driven most scholars insane. Ancient Sith philosophy, written in blood on pages made from skin. Descriptions of rituals that required sacrifices. Instructions for summoning things that shouldn't exist. By 7, he could translate scripts written by Sith who'd been dead for 1,000 years, their words preserved through dark side alchemy. By 10, he'd mastered rituals that could bend reality itself. Ceremonies that could pull knowledge from the minds of the dead. Spells that could make people see things that weren't there. But knowledge wasn't enough. It was never enough. His father made that clear every single day. Darth Wyyrlock too didn't praise him, didn't encourage him, didn't offer comfort when the lessons got too painful or the nights got too long. He just pushed harder, deeper, into the dark, always expecting more, always demanding perfection, always reminding his son that failure was not an option. There were tests, brutal tests, not of strength but of will, of mind, of loyalty. When Wyyrlock was 11, his father locked him in a tomb for 3 days. No food, no water, no light, just silence and voices. The voices of the dead scratching at the edges of his mind, trying to break in, trying to find weaknesses, trying to make him scream, trying to make him beg for it to stop. They whispered promises. They showed him visions. They offered him everything he wanted if he'd just open the door and let them in. He didn't beg. He didn't scream. He didn't open any doors. When his father finally unlocked the tomb and pulled the door open, Wyyrlock walked out like nothing had happened. His face was blank. His eyes were empty. His clothes were filthy, and his body was weak from hunger and dehydration, but he didn't complain, didn't ask for help, didn't show any sign that the experience had affected him at all. He'd learned the lesson. Pain was temporary. Fear was an illusion. The only thing that mattered was control. Control over yourself. Control over others. Control over the truth itself. Because truth, his father told him, was the first thing you had to learn to destroy. Truth was a weapon that could be turned against you. Truth was something other people used to bind you. Truth was optional. malleable, a tool, like any other. The Wyyrlock bloodline wasn't about honor or strength or noble sacrifice. It was about deception, about lies so carefully woven that even the liar forgot where the truth ended and the fiction began. To be a Wyyrlock was to be a shadow, to move unseen, to speak words that meant nothing and everything at once, to serve without kneeling, to control without commanding. And so the boy learned to lie, not just to others, to himself. He learned to bury his emotions so deep that even he couldn't find them anymore. He learned to smile when he felt nothing, to speak warmly when his heart was frozen solid, to stand beside people who trusted him, knowing that trust was just another tool to be used and thrown away when it was no longer useful. He learned that every relationship was transactional, that everyone had a price, that loyalty only mattered when it could be bought or controlled. He learned that love was a trap, that friendship was a mask people wore, that loyalty was only valuable when it served a purpose. And he learned to apply these lessons ruthlessly, without hesitation, without regret. And eventually, he stopped asking why. He stopped wondering if there was another way. He stopped imagining what life might be like if he'd been born somewhere else, to someone else. Because those thoughts were dangerous. Those thoughts led to doubt, and doubt led to failure, and failure led to death. The galaxy beyond Korriban felt like a story, something distant and unreal, something that happened to other people. He heard about wars and rebellions, about Jedi and Republic fleets, about planets burning and empires rising and falling. But none of it felt real. None of it mattered. It was just noise. Background static to the only thing that truly mattered. The legacy, the bloodline, the unbroken chain of Wyyrlocks stretching back into the ancient dark, through centuries of Sith history. His ancestors had served emperors. They'd stood beside the greatest Dark Lords in galactic history. They'd shaped the fall of civilizations and the rise of new orders. They'd been there when the old Republic fell. They'd been there when the Sith Empire rose. They'd survived purges and wars and the endless cycle of Sith betrayal because they were necessary, because they knew things nobody else knew, because they could do things nobody else could do. And now it was his turn, his responsibility, his burden to carry. But there was something else, something that scratched at the back of his mind, even as a child. A question he couldn't fully form, a doubt he couldn't fully bury, no matter how hard he tried. What if the legacy was wrong? What if the bloodline wasn't a gift but a curse? What if power wasn't the answer but the problem? What if everything his father taught him, everything his ancestors had believed, was just another lie in a galaxy full of lies? He didn't speak these thoughts out loud, didn't even let himself think them clearly. But they were there, quiet, patient, waiting in the dark corners of his mind like predators waiting for weakness. His father once told him, standing in a tomb beneath the temple as lightning cracked across the red sky outside, "You are not born to be happy. You are born to be necessary. Happiness is for those who have nothing important to do. You have the most important job in the galaxy. You will preserve what must be preserved. You will remember what must be remembered. And when the time comes, you will do what must be done, no matter the cost." And Wyyrlock believed him, because what choice did he have? Because everything around him reinforced the same message. Because the alternative, that his entire existence was built on a foundation of cruelty and lies, was too terrible to accept. The years crawled by like wounded animals. The lessons continued, each one harder than the last. The pain deepened, became a constant companion. And slowly, piece by piece, day by day, the boy was carved into something else, something harder, something colder, something that could stand in the presence of monsters and feel absolutely nothing. Not fear, not disgust, not pity, nothing. By 15, he'd seen things that would have shattered most adults. He'd witnessed rituals that tore holes in reality, opening windows into places that shouldn't exist. He'd stood near dark side artifacts so powerful that just being close to them made his skin crawl and his teeth ache. He'd watched his father summon creatures from beyond death, things made of shadow and hunger and ancient rage, and command them with nothing but his voice and his will. And through it all, Wyyrlock didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't question. He just observed, learned, absorbed, became more efficient at being what he was supposed to be. Because to question was to fail, and to fail was to die, and death, in the Wyyrlock family, was not a release. It was a failure of duty, the worst possible outcome. But late at night, when the temples were silent and the torches burned low and even the whispers of the dead seemed to fade, he would lie awake on his stone bed and stare at the ceiling. And in those moments, alone with himself, he would wonder, what kind of life was this? What kind of future was waiting for him? Was there ever a choice? Or had his destiny been carved into stone the moment he took his first breath? Would he ever feel anything real? Would he ever be anything other than a tool? Would he ever matter as a person or only as a function? He didn't know, and maybe that was the cruelest part. Maybe the cruelest thing his father ever did was not the pain or the tests or the isolation. Maybe the cruelest thing was making him doubt that he was even human anymore. Because Darth Wyyrlock III wasn't raised to seek answers. He was raised to protect them, to bury them, to guard them with lies and silence and the weight of a legacy he never asked for and couldn't refuse. The temple where he grew up wasn't just a building. It was alive, ancient, hungry. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly. The shadows seemed to watch, following him as he moved through the corridors. And at night, when the wind howled through the broken corridors and whistled through cracks in the ancient stone, you could hear them. The voices, ghosts of Sith Lords who'd been dead for centuries, still clinging to the stones, still whispering their secrets into the void, still trying to influence the living. Most people would have lost their minds within a week. Most people would have run screaming into the desert and taken their chances with whatever lived out there. But Wyyrlock learned to listen. He learned that the dead weren't silent. They were just waiting for someone strong enough to hear them, waiting for someone willing to carry their knowledge forward, waiting for someone desperate or foolish or powerful enough to make a deal. And he was willing. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to be. He spent hours in the deepest tombs, sitting cross-legged in the dark, surrounded by bones and dust and the residue of ancient power, listening, not with his ears but with something deeper, something connected to the Force itself. The Force wasn't a friend to him. It wasn't some mystical ally or benevolent energy. It was a current. A river of power flowing through everything, dark and light mixed together, and if you weren't careful it would drag you under and drown you. But he learned to swim in it, learned to navigate its currents without being swept away. His father taught him the old ways, rituals the Jedi had forgotten or deliberately buried, spells that could bind spirits to your will, summon visions of the past or possible futures, and bend the minds of others without them even knowing it was happening. He learned to speak to the dead, to pull their memories from the void, to make them serve, even in death, to extract knowledge from corpses and echoes and fragments of consciousness that should have faded centuries ago. And with each lesson, each ritual, each successful communion with the dead, he became less human, less boy, less anything that could be called soft or alive or vulnerable. He became a vessel, a tool, a keeper of secrets that should have stayed buried forever, a living library of forbidden knowledge, a weapon his father was forging for some purpose he didn't fully understand yet. By 16, he no longer remembered what it felt like to laugh. He'd forgotten the sound of his own genuine laughter. He no longer remembered what it felt like to cry, or what tears were for. He'd buried those parts of himself so deep they might as well have been dead too. They were gone, severed, as unreachable as the surface of Korriban's long-dead oceans. And his father was pleased. For the first time in his life, his father showed something almost like satisfaction. Not pride, not love, but satisfaction that his tool was finally ready. That the weapon was finally sharp enough. Because that was the point of everything. To strip away everything that made him weak. To carve away the flesh and leave only bone. To turn him into something that could stand beside emperors and never flinch. Never falter, never fail, never question, never feel. But there was a cost. There's always a cost. The galaxy doesn't give you power for free. The dark side doesn't make you strong without taking something in return. The boy who'd been born in that cold stone chamber was gone, and in his place stood something else. Something that wore his face but didn't feel his heart. Something that moved through the world like a ghost, present but not living, breathing but not alive, existing but not truly being. And deep down, in a place even he couldn't reach anymore, in a space so deeply buried it might as well have been in another dimension, a part of him wondered if this was what it meant to be Sith. To trade your soul for power, to trade your heart for legacy, to trade everything you could have been for what you were told to be. To sacrifice your humanity on the altar of duty and call it strength. But he didn't say it out loud. Didn't let the thought grow roots or spread or become anything more than a whisper in the deepest dark, because to think it was to doubt, and to doubt was to fail, and failure was unacceptable. And Darth Wyyrlock III had learned one lesson better than all the others, better than any spell or ritual or ancient secret. He would not fail, not now, not ever, no matter what it cost him. No matter what he had to become, no matter how much of himself he had to destroy to achieve it, even if it killed him, even if, in some very real sense, it already had. There's a difference between learning and breaking. Most people don't realize it until it's too late, until the crack has already spread too far to repair. Wyyrlock learned that difference before he turned 12. He learned it in his bones, in his blood, in the very structure of his thoughts. His father didn't teach him the way the Jedi taught their younglings. There were no field trips to beautiful worlds, no exercises in compassion or understanding, no meditation on peace or balance. There were no gentle words of encouragement or wisdom offered with patience, no sense of discovery or wonder or the joy of learning. There was only the doctrine, cold, absolute, unforgiving. And the doctrine was simple, elegant in its brutality. Knowledge is power, power is survival, and survival requires sacrifice. Everything else was just noise. The lessons began before dawn, when the red sun of Korriban was just starting to stain the horizon. And they ended long after the moons had risen and cast their pale light across the dead world. There were no breaks, no rest, no moments of kindness or humanity. Just the cold stone halls of the temple, the ancient texts that crumbled when you touched them, the artifacts that hummed with malevolent energy, and the voice of his father, sharp and unforgiving as a blade. Darth Wyyrlock too was not just a man. He was a monument to everything the Sith represented, a living relic of tradition that stretched back millennia. He moved through the world with the weight of centuries behind him, every gesture deliberate, every word chosen with precision. When he spoke, it was not to converse or discuss or explore ideas. It was to command, to correct, to cut away weakness like a surgeon cutting away diseased tissue, without anesthetic, without mercy. And his son was the patient on the operating table. Every morning, Wyyrlock would wake to the sound of his father's voice echoing through the halls, not calling his name with any warmth or affection, not offering comfort or connection, just reciting ancient Sith proverbs, verses from texts so old that even their authors had been forgotten by history, their names erased from every record, words that meant nothing and everything at once. Paradoxes wrapped in riddles wrapped in lies. Truth is the first illusion, his father would say, his voice carrying through the stone corridors like the voice of the temple itself. And the last weapon, master both and you master everything. Fail at either and you are nothing. Wyyrlock would repeat the words, his young voice echoing back, not because he understood them, not because they meant anything to him yet, but because he had to, because to refuse was to be punished. And punishment in the Wyyrlock household was not physical, it was something far worse. The lessons were not gentle. They were not designed to be gentle. They were tests, always tests. Every moment was an evaluation, every word a trap, every silence a judgment. He was made to translate scrolls written in languages that had not been spoken in thousands of years, languages that had died when entire civilizations collapsed. Scripts so complex that a single wrong syllable could have consequences, could summon something, could trigger ancient defenses, could kill you where you stood. His father would stand over him, watching with those cold eyes, waiting for a mistake, hoping for one, almost. And when it came, and it always came, because he was just a child, the punishment was swift. Not physical, no. His father did not believe in bruises or broken bones. He believed in something that cut deeper and lasted longer. Shame. When Wyyrlock failed, when he mistranslated a word or missed a nuance or showed any sign of weakness or confusion, his father would simply turn away, silent, disappointed, distant. As if the boy did not exist, as if he had become invisible, erased from reality by his failure. And that silence was worse than any scream, worse than any blow, worse than any pain. Because it meant he was nothing, worthless, unworthy of acknowledgement, a failure to the bloodline. And so the boy learned not to fail. He learned to push through exhaustion, through confusion, through pain. He learned to focus until his mind ached and his vision blurred. He learned to sacrifice sleep, food, comfort, everything in pursuit of perfection. He learned to read the ancient tongues as if they were his own, faster and more accurately than scholars 3 times his age. He learned to decode Sith magic, to trace the flow of dark side energy through rituals and symbols and geometric patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them. He learned to understand the architecture of power itself, how it flowed, how it accumulated, how it could be directed and shaped and weaponized. He learned to see the galaxy not as it was, but as it could be bent, shaped, controlled, manipulated. He learned that reality itself was negotiable, that the Force could be used to rewrite the rules, that nothing was truly fixed or permanent. But the lessons were not just about knowledge. They were not just about accumulating information or mastering techniques. They were about something deeper, something more fundamental to what it meant to be a Wyyrlock. They were about lies. His father taught him that truth was a weapon only the weak wielded, and even then they wielded it poorly. That honesty was a luxury reserved for those who did not understand the game being played around them. That the Sith did not rule through strength alone, or through fear alone, or through any single tool. They ruled through deception, through illusion, through the careful crafting of narratives that others would believe without question, would defend without thinking, would die for without realizing they'd been manipulated. Words are chains, his father told him once, standing in the archives beneath the temple, surrounded by holocrons that whispered in the darkness. And the strongest chains are the ones people put on themselves. Give them the tools and they will build their own prison. Give them the right words and they will lock themselves in. And they will thank you for it. Wyyrlock listened, absorbed every word, let it sink into his mind like water into sand. And slowly, methodically, he began to understand. The doctrine of the Wyyrlock bloodline was not one of brute force. It was not about being the strongest or the fastest or the most powerful. It was about manipulation, about control, about making others believe they had chosen their own fate, when in reality every step had been guided, every choice had been shaped, every path had been laid out long before they even knew they were walking it. And the first person you had to deceive was yourself. His father taught him how to bury emotions, how to take fear, anger, sadness, joy, love, and lock them away in a place so deep inside yourself that even you couldn't reach them anymore. Not because emotions were useless, they had their purpose, but because they were dangerous. They were cracks in your armor, weaknesses, places where others could find a way in. Places where you could be manipulated, controlled, turned against yourself. Emotion is fire, his father said, his voice as cold as the stone around them. It can warm you or it can burn you alive. The key is control, always control. Never let the fire control you. You control the fire. You decide when it burns and when it dies. And you never, ever, let anyone else see it. So Wyyrlock learned to control everything he felt, every reaction, every impulse, every thought. He learned to smile when he felt nothing, to speak warmly when his heart was frozen solid, to stand beside others and let them believe he cared about them, about their problems, about their lives, when in truth he saw them only as pieces on a board. Tools to be used, resources to be managed, obstacles to be removed or avoided. And the terrifying part, the part that would haunt him for the rest of his life, was how easy it became. At first it felt wrong, unnatural, like wearing someone else's skin, like being a puppet controlled by invisible strings. But over time, through repetition and practice and sheer necessity, the mask became the face, the lie became the truth, the performance became reality, and he forgot where one ended and the other began. He forgot what was real and what was pretend. He forgot who he actually was underneath all the layers of deception. By 13, he could lie to anyone, his father, his teachers, other Sith who visited the temple. He could look them in the eye and tell them whatever they wanted to hear, whatever would serve his purpose, whatever would advance his goals. And they believed him, because he believed himself. Because the lie had become so complete that it was indistinguishable from truth. He could look in the mirror and tell himself he was fine, that he was strong, that he was in control, that everything was going according to plan. And he would believe it, even though deep down, buried beneath layers of conditioning and training and self-deception, something inside him was screaming. Something was dying. Something was being slowly strangled. But he learned to ignore the screaming. He learned to silence that inner voice, that last fragment of authentic selfhood, until it was barely a whisper. Because that was the lesson. That was the doctrine. That was what it meant to be a Wyyrlock. To be Sith was to be alone. To be strong was to be silent. To be powerful was to be empty. And to be a Wyyrlock was to be all of these things and more. To be the shadow behind the throne. The voice in the Emperor's ear. The keeper of secrets that could topple governments and reshape civilizations. And so he emptied himself, piece by piece, day by day, until there was nothing left but the mask and the mission, and the cold, calculating intelligence that his father had spent years cultivating. The training intensified as he grew older. His father introduced him to the deeper mysteries of the Sith, not just the history, which was vast and complex and full of contradictions. Not just the rituals, which were powerful but dangerous, but the philosophy, the way of thinking that separated the Sith from everyone else in the galaxy, the worldview that justified everything they did. He learned that the Jedi were not wrong because they were weak, though weakness was certainly part of it. They were wrong because they believed in balance, in peace, in the naive idea that the galaxy could be saved, that sentient beings could be redeemed, that there was some universal good worth striving for. But the Sith knew the truth that most people couldn't accept, the truth that would drive them mad if they truly understood it. The galaxy could not be saved. Sentient beings were fundamentally flawed, driven by base desires and stupid impulses. And there was no universal good, only power and the will to use it. The galaxy could only be ruled, controlled, shaped by those strong enough and smart enough and ruthless enough to do what was necessary. And to rule, you had to understand one simple, undeniable fact about people. People are predictable, laughably so, once you knew what to look for. They want safety. They want comfort. They want to believe that someone, somewhere, is in control, that the chaos can be managed, that the universe makes sense, that their suffering has meaning. And if you could give them that illusion, if you could make them believe that you were their protector, their savior, their guide, then you could do anything. Make them believe anything. Make them do anything. And they would thank you for it. They would fight for you. They would die for you. And they would never realize they'd been manipulated every step of the way. His father taught him how to read people, how to see past their words and into their fears, their desires, their secret selves that they hid even from themselves. How to find the thing they wanted most, the thing they were most afraid to lose, the thing that defined their sense of self, and use it, not through force, not through obvious threats, but through whispers, through suggestions, through the slow, careful planting of ideas that would grow like weeds in their minds, choking out everything else. Until they couldn't remember a time when they hadn't believed exactly what you wanted them to believe. Never force someone to obey you, his father said, demonstrating a mind trick on a visiting scholar who didn't even realize he was being manipulated. Make them want to. Make them believe it was their idea. Make them think they're exercising free will. The strongest prison is one where the prisoners don't know they're imprisoned. And Wyyrlock learned. He learned with a dedication that bordered on obsession. He learned to listen more than he spoke, to watch more than he acted, to wait with the patience of stone, with the patience of the temple itself, until the perfect moment arrived. And then, when that moment came, to strike with precision, not with a blade or a fist, but with a word, a gesture, a carefully placed truth or lie, it didn't matter which. Really, that would unravel everything. The doctrine of secrets was not just about keeping information hidden, though that was certainly part of it. It was about controlling information, about deciding who knew what and when and why, about building a web of lies and half-truths and strategic omissions so intricate, so carefully maintained, that even if one strand broke, the rest would hold. The structure would remain intact. The web would continue to catch its prey. And the most important secret of all, the one his father drilled into him again and again until it became background noise in his thoughts, was this: no one could ever know how much you knew. No one could ever see the full picture. No one could ever understand the extent of your knowledge or your capabilities or your plans. If people believed you were powerful, they would fear you. Good, use that. If they believed you were wise, they would seek your counsel. Better, use that too. But if they believed you knew everything, if they believed you were omniscient, they would either worship you as a god or kill you as a threat. And both of those outcomes were dangerous. Worship made you a target for the ambitious. Death made you dead. So Wyyrlock learned to hide, not his body, which was irrelevant, but his mind, his true thoughts, his real capabilities, the full extent of what he knew and could do. He learned to speak in half-truths and misdirection, to answer questions without really answering them, to make people believe they had discovered the truth on their own, when in reality he had led them there step by step, like leading a blind man through a maze, making them think they could see when they were just following the sound of your voice. And it worked. Gods, it worked better than he ever imagined. By 15, his father began trusting him with real secrets, not just the history of the Sith, which was complicated but ultimately just information, but the operational secrets, the names of agents scattered across the galaxy, the locations of hidden caches of knowledge and artifacts and weapons, the contacts in governments and criminal organizations and corporate entities, the spies embedded in the Jedi Order itself, feeding information back to the Sith, undermining from within. The networks of influence that stretched from the core worlds to the outer rim and beyond. Invisible threads connecting everything, making the galaxy dance to a song most people couldn't even hear. He learned that the Sith were not just a religion or a philosophy or a military force. They were a system, a machine, an organism that had been running for thousands of years, hidden beneath the surface of galactic civilization like roots beneath soil, spreading everywhere, touching everything, shaping history without most people ever knowing it was happening. And the Wyyrlocks were the gears of that machine, the maintenance crew, the engineers who kept it running when others would have let it fall apart. They didn't lead, not in any obvious sense. They maintained, they preserved, they fixed what was broken. They ensured that when the time came, when the moment arrived for the Sith to rise again, the machine would still work, the pieces would still be in place, the plan would still be viable. And now that responsibility was his. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a physical thing, heavy and cold. But there was something else his father taught him, something darker, something that would shape everything that came after, something that, in hindsight, was the seed of his eventual destruction. The doctrine of betrayal. Every master will eventually fail, his father said one night, standing in the deepest archives beneath the temple, surrounded by holocrons that flickered with ghost light. It is inevitable. Time consumes all things. The dark side consumes its servants. Death comes for everyone, even those who think they've escaped it. And when your master fails, when they become weak or foolish or simply worn out, you must be ready to replace them, not out of ambition, though ambition is useful, but out of necessity, because the legacy must continue. The machine must keep running. The plan must move forward. Even if it means stepping over the body of the one who taught you, even if it means killing your own master. He paused, letting the words sink in, watching his son's face for any reaction. There was none. The boy had learned too well. Loyalty is a tool, his father continued, not a virtue. The Jedi make loyalty a virtue, and it makes them weak. They die for each other. They sacrifice themselves for causes and ideals and friendships, and they lose. They always lose. We make loyalty a tool. We use it when it serves us. We discard it when it doesn't. And that is why we survive when they fall. Wyyrlock didn't respond. He simply nodded, absorbing the lesson like all the others, filing it away, adding it to the growing library of knowledge in his mind. But somewhere, deep in that place he couldn't reach anymore, something shifted, something cracked just a little, because he understood what his father was really saying. One day, his father would fail, would become weak or obsolete or simply inconvenient. And when that day came, Wyyrlock would have to kill him. Not might, would have to. It was inevitable. It was part of the doctrine, part of being a Wyyrlock, part of being Sith. The years continued to pass. The lessons never stopped, and slowly, methodically, Wyyrlock stopped being a boy. The transformation was gradual but total. He became something else, something harder, something colder, something that could stand in a room full of Sith Lords, beings who had killed thousands and thought nothing of it, and never show fear, never show doubt, never show anything but calm, calculated control. His emotions were buried so deep they might as well have been on another planet. His true thoughts were hidden behind so many layers of deception that even he wasn't sure what he really believed anymore. His face had become a mask that never came off, even when he was alone, because he'd forgotten what his real face looked like. But late at night, in those few hours between the end of lessons and the beginning of sleep, when he would lie on his stone bed in his cold chamber and stare at the darkness above him, he would wonder, was this strength or was this emptiness? Was this power or was this surrender? Had he mastered himself, or had he simply become what his father wanted, a tool shaped perfectly for its purpose but with no will of its own? Was he even human anymore? Or had he become something else entirely? He didn't know, and that uncertainty, that fundamental doubt about his own nature, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because the moment you start questioning the doctrine starts questioning you. The moment you show doubt, you show weakness. The moment you show weakness, you become expendable. And in the world of the Sith, expendable meant dead. But Wyyrlock was good at lying, even to himself, especially to himself. So, he buried the doubt, locked it away with all the other inconvenient emotions and thoughts and questions, and told himself he was fine, told himself he was exactly what he needed to be, told himself that the sacrifice was worth it. And for a while, for years actually, he believed it. The lie held, the mask stayed on, the machine kept running. But the truth has a way of finding you, no matter how deep you bury it, no matter how many lies you pile on top, no matter how hard you run or how well you hide. And one day, the truth would come for Darth Wyyrlock III. One day, the lies would stop working. One day, the mask would crack and the emptiness underneath would be exposed. And when that happened, he would finally understand what his father had really taught him. Not how to be strong, but how to be alone. Not how to master the Force, but how to be mastered by it. Not how to live, but how to exist without truly being alive. But that day was still far off. For now, he was still the perfect student, the perfect tool, the perfect heir to a bloodline built on secrets and lies and the careful management of truth. And he would continue to be perfect right up until the moment he broke. There are moments in life when everything changes, not because of a battle, not because of a war, but because of a single decision, a single word, a single person walking into your life and rewriting all the rules you thought you understood. For Darth Wyyrlock III, that moment came when he was 23 years old. The message arrived without warning, a transmission from the far reaches of the galaxy, coded in a language only a handful of beings could understand, an ancient Sith dialect that predated the Republic itself. His father received it first, standing in the communications chamber deep within the temple, bathed in the red glow of the holographic display. And for the first time in Wyyrlock's entire life, he saw something in his father's eyes that he had never seen before. Fear. Not fear of death. Sith don't fear death. They understand it, respect it, plan for it, but they don't fear it. But fear of something worse. Fear of change. Fear of the unknown. Fear of a power so great, so undeniable, that even the Wyyrlocks, keepers of ancient secrets and masters of manipulation, would have to bow, would have to acknowledge a superior force. The message was simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. Darth Krayt had awakened, and he was summoning the faithful. All those who claimed to serve the Sith cause were being called to account, called to prove their worth, called to bend the knee or be swept aside. Wyyrlock had heard the name before, in whispers, in legends, in the oldest texts hidden deep within the archives, texts that even his father approached with caution. Darth Krayt, a Sith Lord who had lived for over a century through means both technological and mystical, a warrior who had survived death itself, had been infected by Yuuzhan Vong parasites and turned that curse into a source of power. A being who had rebuilt the Sith from the ashes of their greatest defeat and forged them into something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, something terrifying in its scope and ambition. The One Sith, not the rule of two that had governed Sith doctrine for 1,000 years, not the old ways of master and apprentice, locked in an eternal cycle of betrayal and succession, each generation killing the previous one. No, this was something different, something that broke all the old rules, an army of Sith, hundreds or perhaps thousands strong, all bound not by tradition or fear but by loyalty. Loyalty to a single vision, a single philosophy, a single will, a single man, Darth Krayt. And now, after years of rumors and whispers and half-believed reports, he wanted to meet the Wyyrlocks, wanted to judge them, wanted to decide if they were useful or obsolete. His father prepared for weeks. The transformation was remarkable to watch. The man who had seemed like a monument, unchanging and eternal, suddenly revealed his humanity through his anxiety. He gathered texts and artifacts and relics from the deepest parts of the temple, things that hadn't been touched in centuries. He rehearsed words and phrases and greetings in the old tongue. He reviewed histories and precedents and protocols. He moved with a kind of urgency that Wyyrlock had never seen before, and that urgency said more than any words could have. And that's when Wyyrlock realized something. something that shifted his understanding of the galaxy and his place in it. His father was afraid of failing, afraid that the Wyyrlock bloodline, which had survived for so long by being necessary, by being indispensable, might finally be judged obsolete, might finally meet a Sith Lord who didn't need them. Because this wasn't just a meeting, this was an audition, a test, a judgment. The Wyyrlocks had served Sith Lords for generations, but this was different. Darth Krayt was not a warlord looking for advisors. He was not a politician looking for spin doctors. He was not even an emperor looking for administrators. He was a prophet looking for believers, a visionary looking for disciples. And if the Wyyrlocks failed to prove their worth, failed to demonstrate that they understood and accepted his vision, they would be cast aside, forgotten, made irrelevant by history. And for a bloodline that had survived for centuries by being necessary, by being the ones who knew things nobody else knew and could do things nobody else could do, irrelevance was worse than death. Death was final, clean. Irrelevance was a slow fade into obscurity, a gradual erasure from importance. When the day finally came, Wyyrlock and his father traveled to the hidden fortress where Krayt had established his throne. The journey itself was strange. It wasn't on Korriban. It wasn't on Dromund Kaas or any of the other traditional Sith worlds. It wasn't on any world marked on Republic maps or even on most Imperial charts. It was a place that existed only in rumor and legend. A dead moon orbiting a dying star, cloaked in darkness and navigational anomalies that made it nearly impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. And at its heart was a temple, but not like the ancient temples of Korriban. Not crumbling ruins slowly being reclaimed by desert and time. This was new, built recently, constructed from black stone and red glass and materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was a monument to power, to ambition, to the belief that the galaxy could be conquered, not through war alone, but through the systematic application of will and force and vision. The architecture was strange, organic in some ways, geometric in others. It seemed to shift depending on how you looked at it, perspective playing tricks, angles refusing to stay constant. And everywhere, there was the hum of power. The dark side was so thick here you could almost see it, a visible distortion in the air like heat waves rising from hot stone. The fortress was lit by the glow of 1,000 holocrons, ancient teaching devices, repositories of Sith knowledge, all active at once. Their voices created a chorus, a background whisper of dark wisdom that never stopped. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, terrifying. And at the center of it all, seated on a throne that looked like it had been carved from the bones of some massive creature, something that shouldn't exist, was Darth Krayt. He was not what Wyyrlock expected. He had built up an image in his mind over the years. Most Sith Lords were monsters in some way, twisted by the dark side into something barely recognizable as human, consumed by rage or hunger or madness until there was nothing left but appetite and will. But Krayt was different, fundamentally different. He was calm, controlled. His face was hidden beneath a mask that bore ancient Sith markings, but his body language spoke volumes. There was no restlessness, no twitching, no signs of the barely controlled violence that characterized so many dark side users. He sat perfectly still, radiating presence without moving, dominating the space through sheer force of personality. His body was wrong, though. Wyyrlock could see that immediately. The Yuuzhan Vong coral growths that covered parts of his body, organic armor that had fused with his flesh, growing into him over decades. It should have been horrific. It should have looked like a disease, a corruption. But somehow Krayt made it look intentional. Made it look like he had chosen this, had weaponized his own infection, turned weakness into strength through sheer will. And his eyes, even through the mask, you could see his eyes. They burned with something that wasn't anger or joy or any simple emotion. It was certainty, pure, unshakable certainty. This was a being who knew he would win, knew the galaxy would fall, knew the Jedi would burn. Knew all of this with the kind of absolute conviction that made doubt feel like treason, like a failure of understanding rather than a reasonable response. And when he spoke, his voice was not loud. It was not commanding in the way warriors command. It was soft, almost gentle, like a teacher speaking to students who had finally arrived after a long journey. Like he had been waiting for them specifically. "You are the Wyyrlocks," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. Wyyrlock's father bowed, deep, lower than Wyyrlock had ever seen him bow before, lower than he had thought the man capable of bowing. It was a submission, complete and total. "We are, my lord," his father said, and there was something in his voice Wyyrlock had never heard before. Reverence. Actual reverence. Not the performance of respect, but the real thing. "We have served the Sith for generations. We have kept the ancient knowledge alive. We have preserved the traditions and the rituals and the wisdom of Khals." "I know," Krayt interrupted, not rudely, not dismissively, but with finality, like there was no need to continue because he already understood everything that needed to be understood. "I know who you are. I know what you have done. I know the services you have rendered to the Sith cause over centuries, and I know what you are capable of." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes, burning behind the mask, locked onto Wyyrlock's father with an intensity that was almost physical. Then, slowly, deliberately, they shifted to Wyyrlock. And for the first time in his entire life, Wyyrlock felt truly seen. Not examined, not evaluated, but seen. Recognized, understood at a level that went beyond words or explanations. This was a being who looked at him and knew the training, knew the sacrifices, knew the emptiness, knew what it meant to carry a legacy that weighed more than your own life. "You," Krayt said, pointing directly at Wyyrlock with one armored finger. "Step forward." Wyyrlock hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. His father's hand twitched, like he wanted to reach out and stop him. Wanted to say something, wanted to maintain control of the situation. But he didn't, he couldn't, because this was not his decision to make. This was not his conversation to control. Wyyrlock stepped forward, crossed the distance between them, stood before the throne. Krayt studied him in silence. The moment stretched, became uncomfortable, but Wyyrlock held his ground, held eye contact, refused to look away or show weakness. This was a test. Everything was always a test. "How old are you?" Krayt asked finally. 23, my lord. "And you have studied the old ways, the rituals and languages and philosophies." "Yes, my lord." "You can read the ancient scripts, translate the lost languages, perform the ceremonies." "Yes, my lord." "And you understand what it means to serve?" The question hung in the air. It was different from the previous questions, heavier, more complex. Not about knowledge or skill, but about something fundamental, something philosophical. Wyyrlock paused. He could feel his father's anxiety radiating from behind him, could feel the weight of expectation. could feel this moment balanced on a knife's edge. "I understand that service is not weakness," Wyyrlock said carefully, choosing each word with precision. "It is purpose. Service gives shape to power, direction to strength, meaning to existence. Without purpose, power is just chaos. Without service, strength is just destruction." Krayt smiled, not with his mouth, which was hidden behind the mask, but with his eyes. They brightened, warmed, showed something almost like approval. "Good," he said. "Very good, because I do not need warriors. Warriors I have in abundance. I do not need generals. Generals are easy to find. I do not need politicians or administrators or any of the usual tools of empire. What I need is something rarer. Someone who understands that power is not about taking. It is about keeping. And to keep power, you must understand its history, its roots, its deepest secrets. You must know where it came from to know where it can go." He stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, but when he reached his full height, the effect was dramatic. He was tall, taller than he looked sitting, and the dark side rippled around him like a visible aura. The Force responded to his presence, bent to his will, made the air itself shimmer. "I am building an empire," Krayt said, his voice carrying through the chamber, through the fortress, maybe through the Force itself. "Not for myself, not for glory or wealth or any petty ambition, but for the Sith, for the dark side, for the galaxy itself, whether it knows it needs saving or not. And I need those who can see beyond today, beyond tomorrow, who can look into the past and find the patterns that shape the future, who can take the wisdom of millennia and apply it to the challenges of now." He walked toward Wyyrlock, each step deliberate, each movement calculated. The distance closed between them until he stood close enough that Wyyrlock could see every detail of the mask, every mark and scar and symbol. "Your father is a keeper of knowledge," Krayt said, not looking at the older Wyyrlock, keeping his attention focused entirely on the younger. "He has preserved much that would have been lost. But knowledge without vision is just dust. Books on shelves, data in archives. I need someone who can take what was and turn it into what will be. Someone who can look at ancient wisdom and see modern applications. Someone who can help me build something that will last not just years or decades but centuries, millennia." He stopped directly in front of Wyyrlock, close enough to reach out and touch. Close enough that Wyyrlock could feel the heat radiating from the Vong armor. Close enough to see the complexity in those burning eyes. "I need you," Krayt said simply. And just like that, with 3 words, Wyyrlock's entire life changed, shifted, became something new. He did not return to Korriban. His father did, alone. Walking back to their ship with shoulders that seemed slightly more bent, posture that seemed slightly more defeated. The bloodline would continue, but it had just jumped a generation, skipped over the father and chosen the son, and that was its own kind of death. Wyyrlock stayed, not as a prisoner, not as a slave, but as something else. An apprentice, though not in the traditional Sith sense. A lawkeeper, a scholar, a shadow that would walk beside the greatest Sith Lord in a generation and learn what it truly meant to rule, what it truly meant to shape the galaxy. At first, everything was overwhelming. The fortress was alive with activity, with power, with ambition. Sith, who had come from every corner of the galaxy, drawn to Krayt's vision like pilgrims to a holy site. Warriors and assassins, and spies and sorcerers. Beings who had killed thousands, who had toppled governments, who had bent entire systems to their will. And Wyyrlock, at 23, was thrust into the center of all of it. He was given access to Krayt's personal archives, holocrons that had been lost for centuries, presumed destroyed, somehow recovered and restored, texts that even his father did not know existed, secrets that had been buried by the Jedi, by the Old Republic, by previous Sith Lords who wanted to keep certain knowledge exclusive, information that could reshape understanding of the Force itself. And Krayt expected him to master all of it, to absorb it, to understand it, to synthesize it into something useful, to find connections and patterns and applications that others had missed. But more than that, Krayt expected him to think, to question, to challenge. Most Sith Lords wanted blind followers, wanted beings who would obey without question, who would accept every word as gospel, who would sacrifice themselves without hesitation. But Krayt was different. Fundamentally different. He wanted partners, wanted intelligent loyalty, wanted people who could challenge his assumptions, question his logic, point out flaws in his reasoning and make him stronger through their resistance. He wanted disciples, yes, but disciples who thought, who understood, who chose to follow because they believed, not because they feared. And Wyyrlock, for the first time in his entire life, thrived in ways he hadn't known were possible. His mind was not being crushed under the weight of impossible expectations. It was being sharpened, honed, pushed to its limits, and then pushed further, but in ways that felt like growth rather than destruction. Krayt did not punish him for asking questions. He encouraged it, demanded it, would sit with Wyyrlock for hours, sometimes days, discussing philosophy and strategy and the nature of power itself. "The Jedi believe in balance," Krayt said once, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the abyss of space, stars burning in the distance like distant candles. "They believe the Force has two sides, light and dark, and that peace comes from keeping them in equilibrium, preventing either side from dominating. But they are wrong. Fundamentally, philosophically wrong. Balance is not peace. Balance is stagnation. Balance is entropy. True growth, true evolution, true power comes from dominance. From choosing a side and committing to it fully. From pushing one principle to its absolute limit and seeing what emerges." And yet, Wyyrlock said carefully, testing the boundaries of what could be said, every Sith empire in history has fallen. Every attempt at dominance has eventually collapsed. Doesn't that suggest something flawed in the philosophy? He half expected anger, expected to be struck down for the impertinence, but Krayt just smiled. "Exactly," Krayt said. "Exactly. You see the problem. Previous Sith empires failed because they were built on the wrong foundation. They were built on ambition, on betrayal, on the belief that the strongest should rule, and that strength is measured in individual power. The rule of two codified this, made it doctrine, ensured that every generation would kill the previous one. That knowledge would be lost. That progress would be cyclical rather than linear. But I have built something different. The One Sith are not competing with each other. They are cooperating, working toward a common vision. And that vision is supported by beings like you, keepers of knowledge, preservers of wisdom. Those who understand that empires are not built with lightsabers and force lightning. They are built with ideas, with systems, with institutions that outlast any individual." Wyyrlock absorbed every word, let it sink in, turned it over in his mind, and slowly, gradually, he began to see the vision, not just of conquest but of genuine transformation. Krayt did not want to destroy the galaxy. He wanted to save it, to reshape it into something stronger. Something that could withstand the chaos that had plagued civilization for millennia. something that could finally bring true order to the stars. And for the first time in his life, Wyyrlock believed, really believed, not because he had been told to, not because he feared the consequences of disbelief, but because he had examined the arguments and found them compelling, because he had looked at the evidence and drawn his own conclusions, because he had chosen. He believed in the mission, in the vision, in the man who carried it. But there was something else, something that gnawed at him in the quiet moments between lessons and discussions, something he noticed but tried to ignore, because acknowledging it would mean confronting something terrible. Krayt was dying. Not quickly, not obviously, but slowly, inexorably, inevitably. The dark side was consuming him from the inside out. The same power that kept him alive, that had sustained him for over a century, that had allowed him to survive things that would have killed anyone else, was also eating him alive. The Yuuzhan Vong infection that he had turned into armor was spreading, slowly but unstoppably. And no matter how strong he was, no matter how much knowledge he possessed, no matter how much will he could muster, he could not stop it. Wyyrlock saw it in the way Krayt moved. The occasional pause, the slight hesitation, like his body was fighting him. The way he would sometimes grip the edge of a table or a railing, supporting himself in moments when he thought no one was watching. The way his breath would come slightly labored after exertion that should not have affected him. The way his eyes sometimes seemed to look past the present moment, past the immediate conversation, into some dark and inevitable future. And Wyyrlock wondered, in those moments when he allowed himself to think dangerous thoughts, what would happen when Krayt finally died? What would happen to the vision, to the empire being built, to the One Sith who had pledged themselves to his cause? Would it crumble? Would it collapse into infighting and chaos? Would the rule of two reassert itself, and with it, the endless cycle of betrayal and destruction? Or would someone else step forward, someone who understood the vision well enough to carry it forward, someone who had been trained and prepared and shaped specifically for that purpose? Someone like him? The thought came unbidden, unwanted, dangerous, and Wyyrlock buried it immediately, pushed it down into that deep place where he kept all his uncomfortable truths. Because to entertain such thoughts was to imagine betrayal, and betrayal in Krayt's empire would mean death. Not just death, but erasure, complete and total. But the thought did not go away. It lingered in the back of his mind, quiet, patient, growing slowly like a seed in dark soil, waiting. And deep down, beneath all the layers of training and discipline and self-deception, Wyyrlock knew something with absolute certainty. One day, he would have to choose. Between loyalty and survival, between the man who had given him purpose and the vision that transcended any individual, between preserving what Krayt had built and letting it die with him. But not today, not yet. Today, he was still learning, still growing, still becoming whatever Krayt needed him to be. And as he stood beside Darth Krayt, watching the galaxy turn in the view screen, watching stars die and nebulae form, and the great cosmic cycle continue its eternal dance, Wyyrlock made himself a promise. He would serve, he would learn, he would become everything this vision required. Even if it meant losing himself completely in the process, even if it meant becoming something unrecognizable, even if it meant sacrificing every last piece of whatever humanity he had left. Because that was still the doctrine, still the lesson he had learned on Korriban. To be necessary, you had to be willing to sacrifice everything. Even your soul, maybe especially your soul. There are some truths that break you slowly, like water dripping on stone, one drop at a time, barely noticeable, easy to ignore. Until one day, without warning, the stone cracks clean through and everything collapses at once. For Darth Wyyrlock, that truth came in the silence between words, in the spaces where things went unsaid, in the carefully maintained fiction that everyone pretended to believe. It had been 7 years since he joined Krayt, 7 years of war and conquest and transformation, 7 years of watching the One Sith rise from scattered cells and hidden enclaves to become a genuine force in the galaxy. 7 years of standing beside a man who seemed unstoppable, who seemed to have transcended the normal limits of mortality and power. The galaxy burned, just as Krayt had predicted. The Jedi fell, scattered and broken. The Galactic Alliance crumbled under the weight of coordinated Sith assault. Worlds that had stood for millennia bent the knee, and at the center of it all, Darth Krayt stood seemingly unshaken, an unmovable pillar around which the galaxy's fate revolved. But Wyyrlock saw what others either did not see or chose to ignore. The cracks, the spreading cracks. Krayt was dying, not in some distant theoretical future, but now, every day, every breath was a struggle. The dark side that had sustained him for over a century, that had kept him alive through injuries that should have killed him a dozen times over, was now consuming him. The Yushinvong parasites that had fused with his body, that he had weaponized and turned into organic armor, were spreading out of control. The rituals that had extended his life were failing one by one, and no amount of Sith alchemy or Force mastery could stop the inevitable. And Krayt knew it. That was the terrible part. He was not in denial. He saw his own decline with perfect clarity. And he was obsessed with finding a solution, with transcending this final limitation, with conquering death itself the way he had conquered so many other obstacles. He tried to hide it from everyone else, tried to project the same strength and certainty and invincibility. But Wyyrlock had spent his entire life reading the spaces between words, analyzing what people did not say, understanding the meanings hidden beneath surface appearances. And in Krayt's careful silences, in his strategic absences, in the way he arranged matters so that others would not see him at his weakest, Wyyrlock heard everything. The Empire was growing stronger every day, but its emperor was fading just as fast. The war was being won, but the general who had started it was losing his own private battle. And nobody else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did notice and simply chose not to speak of it, because to acknowledge that Krayt was dying was to acknowledge that the entire structure might collapse, that the vision might prove to be dependent on a single individual after all. That all the talk of building something that would outlast any one person might have been just that talk. And that was unacceptable to everyone involved. So they pretended, all of them, the Sith Lords who commanded fleets and armies, the assassins and spies who operated in shadow, the administrators who kept the machinery of government running. They all maintained the fiction that everything was fine, that Krayt was eternal, that the empire being built would last forever. But Wyyrlock could not pretend. His training would not allow it. His entire life had been about seeing truth, about cutting through illusion and identifying reality, no matter how uncomfortable. And the truth was stark and unavoidable. If Krayt died now, if he died before the empire was consolidated, before the systems were fully in place, before the vision was institutionalized beyond dependence on charismatic leadership, the One Sith would tear itself apart within weeks, maybe days. They were not like the old Sith, bound by the brutal simplicity of the rule of two. They were many, hundreds of them, all powerful, all ambitious, all united under a single vision and a single leader. But without that leader, without Krayt's personal authority and overwhelming presence holding them together, they would fracture. They would turn on each other. They would revert to type, become the same backstabbing, ambitious monsters that Sith had always been. And the galaxy would survive. The Jedi would rise again eventually. The Republic, or whatever replaced it, would rebuild. And everything Krayt had fought for, everything he had accomplished, would be lost to history as just another failed Sith empire. Another cautionary tale about the inherent instability of dark side governance. Wyyrlock could not let that happen. Not after 7 years. Not after he had come to genuinely believe in the vision, in the possibility that this time could be different, that the galaxy could actually be reshaped into something better. Not because he loved Krayt. Love was still not a concept that had any real meaning in his emotional vocabulary, but because he believed. He had examined the philosophy from every angle and found it sound. He had seen the alternative chaos and endless suffering, and determined that the order Krayt promised was worth pursuing. And if Krayt's death would destroy that possibility, then Krayt could not be allowed to die. Not yet. Not like this. Not before the transition could be managed. But Krayt was not listening to reason anymore. He was not behaving rationally. The fear of death, which he had always claimed to have transcended, had him in its grip after all. He became obsessed, consumed by the search for resurrection, for transcendence, for some technique or ritual or forgotten piece of lore that would allow him to overcome this final enemy. He spent days locked in the deepest chambers of the fortress, surrounded by ancient texts and dark side artifacts, searching desperately for answers that might not exist. And he was failing. Every attempt made things worse. Every ritual he tried left him weaker rather than stronger. Every spell drained more of his dwindling reserves of strength. The dark side was no longer a tool he wielded. It had become a parasite feeding on him, and the more he drew on it in his desperation, the faster it consumed him. Wyyrlock watched from the edges, silent, patient, calculating, trying to figure out how to save the vision from the man who had created it. And then, one night during a council meeting with the senior Sith Lords, Krayt collapsed. It happened mid-sentence. He was discussing strategy for the conquest of the core worlds, speaking with his usual authority and clarity. And then suddenly he stopped. His hand shot out to grip the edge of the table. His breath became audible, labored. His entire body swayed like a tree in high wind. And for one terrible moment, for one eternal heartbeat, everyone in the room saw it. The invincibility was gone. The illusion had shattered. And beneath the mask of strength was something fragile and mortal and dying. Krayt steadied himself, straightened up, and continued speaking as if nothing had happened, picking up exactly where he had left off. His voice was calm. His words were measured. He gave no sign that anything was wrong. But it was too late. The seed had been planted. The doubt had taken root in every mind in that room. And Wyyrlock knew that this was the beginning of the end. The fiction could not hold much longer. After the meeting, as the other lords departed in careful silence, Wyyrlock followed Krayt to his private chambers. He did not ask permission. He simply entered, because by now he had earned the right to be present in Krayt's most private moments, to witness the man behind the legend. Krayt was sitting on the edge of his meditation platform, his mask removed and set carefully aside. His face was exposed. And for the first time, Wyyrlock saw him truly clearly, without any barriers or defenses. He was not a monster. He was not the invincible Dark Lord of Sith legend. He was just a man, an old man, a dying man. His skin was pale, where it was not covered by von coral, stretched thin over bone. His eyes were sunken deep in their sockets. His breath came in careful, measured gasps. Scars covered every visible surface, testimonies to a century of violence and survival. He looked like a corpse that had simply forgotten to die, like something that should have ended years ago but was being held together by will alone, and that will was finally failing. "You should not be here," Krayt said quietly, not looking up. "I know," Wyyrlock replied, standing just inside the doorway. "Then why are you?" Wyyrlock did not answer immediately. He studied the man who had become his master, his teacher, the closest thing to a father figure he had ever known, though neither of them would have used that word. The man who had given his life new purpose and direction. "Because you are dying," Wyyrlock said finally, speaking the truth that everyone else was too afraid to voice. "And you refuse to accept it." Krayt laughed. It was a terrible sound. Dry and brittle, like paper crumbling. "I have died before, multiple times. I will die again. It does not matter. Death is just another transition, another challenge to overcome." "It matters this time," Wyyrlock said firmly, "because this time there is no coming back. You know that. The rituals are not working. The dark side is consuming you faster than you can regenerate. And if you die now, before the systems are in place, before the transition is managed, everything you have built will crumble within days." Krayt turned to look at him, and for a moment, there was something in those ancient eyes that Wyyrlock had never seen before. Something that might have been regret, or might have been recognition, or might have been resignation. "Then what would you have me do?" Krayt asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "What solution do you propose that I have not already considered?" And that was the moment when the door opened, when the question was asked, when Wyyrlock stepped across a line he could never uncross. "Let go," Wyyrlock said simply. Krayt stared at him, silent, waiting for elaboration. "Let go of the need to live forever," Wyyrlock continued, choosing each word carefully. "Let go of the need to see every victory personally. You have built something greater than yourself. Let it outlive you. That is the only true immortality anyway, creating something that continues after you are gone." "And who would lead?" Krayt asked, and there was something sharp in his tone now. "Who would carry the vision forward? Who understands it well enough to prevent it from being corrupted or abandoned?" Wyyrlock did not answer with words. He simply stood there, meeting Krayt's eyes, letting the implication speak for itself. They both knew there was only one person who could do it. Only one person who had been trained in all the secrets, who understood the philosophy at its deepest levels, who had stood beside the Emperor and learned not just how to rule but why to rule in this particular way. And that person was standing right there. Krayt smiled. It was a sad expression, weary and knowing. "You think you are ready," he said softly, "but you are not. Not yet. You understand the knowledge. You comprehend the history and the systems and the philosophy, but you do not understand what it costs to rule, what it feels like to carry the weight of an empire on your shoulders, to make decisions that kill millions and call it necessary, to sacrifice everything, including your own humanity, for a vision that might fail anyway." "Then teach me," Wyyrlock said. "You still have time. Not much, but some. Teach me what I need to know." "I have been teaching you," Krayt replied, "for 7 years. You just have not realized it yet. Everything I have shown you, Everything we have discussed has been preparation. I have been training you to take my place since the day you arrived." He stood slowly, painfully, each movement obviously costing him. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars beyond. "I will not die easily," Krayt said. "I will fight this with everything I have. I will cling to life as long as possible, because that is who I am. That is what I do. But when the time comes, when the body finally fails completely, when there is truly no hope left, I want you to be ready, not to mourn, not to hesitate, but to act decisively." He turned to face Wyyrlock directly, and his voice became iron, the voice of command that had bent star systems to his will. "If I fall, you will take my place. Not in name at first, the One Sith are not ready for that transition yet, but in function. You will wear the mask if necessary. You will speak with my voice. You will issue orders in my name. You will make them believe that I still live, still guide them. And you will lead in my stead until the Empire is strong enough to survive without the fiction. Do you understand?" Wyyrlock nodded slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of what was being asked, feeling the magnitude of the responsibility being placed on his shoulders. Because he did understand. He understood perfectly. This was not a request. It was an order. A final command from a dying emperor to the shadow who would inherit everything. And Wyyrlock accepted it. Not with enthusiasm, not with ambition or hunger for power, but with the cold, calculated understanding of someone who had been shaped his entire life for exactly this moment. 3 months later, Darth Krayt fell into a coma. Not death, not yet, but something close to it, a twilight state between life and death from which he could not wake. The Sith healers tried everything in their considerable arsenal. The dark side masters performed rituals that should have been able to pull someone back from the very edge of the Force itself. The alchemists crafted potions using ingredients that cost entire star systems to acquire, but nothing worked. Krayt's body was shutting down. His mind was slipping away into darkness, and there was nothing anyone could do except watch. So they made a decision, collectively, without really discussing it. They placed him in a stasis chamber, a sophisticated medical device combined with Sith alchemy. A tomb of black glass and red light that would preserve his body indefinitely, keep it from decaying, maintain the possibility that he might somehow return. It became a shrine almost immediately, a place of pilgrimage for the One Sith. And the Sith Lords gathered in the main hall, uncertain and afraid and looking for someone to tell them what to do next, to provide direction in this moment of crisis. Wyyrlock stood before them, calm, controlled, every gesture deliberate, and he spoke with a voice that was not entirely his own. "Lord Krayt lives," he said, and the lie rolled off his tongue as smoothly as any truth. "He has entered a deep meditation, a communion with the dark side itself at levels we cannot comprehend. He walks between worlds, gathering knowledge and power. He will return when the time is right, when he has achieved what he seeks. Until then, I will act in his stead. I will carry his will forward. I will speak with his authority, and you will follow." And they did, without question, without visible hesitation. Because they wanted to believe, needed to believe, because the alternative, accepting that their leader was effectively dead, that they were leaderless in the middle of a war, was too terrifying to contemplate. Because the fiction was easier than the truth. And so, the lie began in earnest. The lie that would define Wyyrlock's life for years to come. The lie that would consume him piece by piece. Darth Krayt was not dead. He was dreaming, meditating, communing with ancient powers. He would return when the galaxy most needed him. And Darth Wyyrlock became the dreamer's voice, the interpreter, the regent in all but name. But late at night, when the fortress was silent, and the Sith Lords had departed to their own chambers and the Empire slept uneasily, Wyyrlock would stand before the stasis chamber and look at the body inside. The body of the man who had given him everything, who had trusted him with this impossible responsibility. And Wyyrlock would wonder, in those dark, quiet moments, did I save him? Or did I kill him? Did I preserve the vision? Or have I already begun to betray it? And in the reflection of the black glass, he would see his own face, and sometimes he would not recognize it, would not be able to connect that cold, empty expression with any memory of who he used to be. And he would realize the truth. It did not matter anymore, whether Krayt was dead or dreaming, whether the vision would succeed or fail, whether Wyyrlock was savior or betrayer, none of it mattered in any personal sense. Because the dreamer was already gone in every way that counted, and in his place stood a liar, a necessary liar, perhaps, a liar serving a greater purpose, but a liar nonetheless. A liar who would rule an empire from the shadows, a liar who would carry a legacy forward, a liar who would never stop lying, not even to himself, because the moment the lies stopped, everything would collapse. And Darth Wyyrlock III, who had been born in darkness and raised on deception, who had been forged into a tool for exactly this purpose, stepped fully into his role. The role he would play until it destroyed him. There is a kind of power that does not announce itself with thunderous voice or devastating displays of force lightning. That does not require a throne or a crown or any visible symbol of authority. That moves through the world like smoke, unseen but felt, shaping everything without appearing to touch anything. And the most dangerous thing about this kind of power is simple. By the time you realize it exists, by the time you understand that you are being controlled, it has already consumed you so completely that you cannot imagine any alternative. You defend it, you protect it, you perpetuate it willingly. Darth Wyyrlock had become the embodiment of that smoke, that invisible power. On the surface, nothing had changed in the Empire. The war against the Galactic Alliance continued according to plan. Orders were issued from the throne. Battles were won, territory was consolidated, and to anyone looking from the outside, to anyone who did not know the truth, Darth Krayt was still very much in command, still leading, still the invincible Dark Lord who had built an empire from scattered pieces. But behind the mask, behind the voice that issued commands, behind the illusion that everyone wanted to believe, there was only Wyyrlock, just Wyyrlock, making every decision, navigating every crisis, solving every problem. He did not sit on Krayt's throne. That would have been too obvious, too blatant a claim to power that would have invited challenge. Instead, he stood beside it, spoke for Krayt, relayed Krayt's commands to the assembled lords, ensured that every decision, every strategy, every word that left the council chambers carried the weight of Krayt's personal authority. And remarkably, amazingly, nobody questioned it, not openly, not directly, because they did not want to question. Because to question was to admit that the Emperor might be truly gone, that the foundation of everything they had built might be crumbling, that their entire cause might be dependent on a fiction. And if they admitted that, if they allowed themselves to truly accept that reality, then what were they fighting for? What held the Empire together? What prevented them from turning on each other the way Sith always had throughout history? Fear. That was the answer. though none of them would have phrased it that way. Fear of the unknown, fear of collapse and chaos. Fear that if they pulled at this one thread, questioned this one obvious fiction, the entire tapestry would unravel in their hands. So they chose collectively, without ever explicitly discussing it, to believe the lie, to maintain the fiction, to pretend that everything was normal. And Wyyrlock, who had been trained since birth in the art of deception, who understood lies the way other people understood breathing, let them, encouraged them, reinforced their chosen delusion at every opportunity. At first, it was almost easy. The Sith Lords were accustomed to hierarchy and following orders. They were used to having someone tell them what to do, where to fight, what objectives to pursue. And as long as those orders made strategic sense, as long as the Empire kept growing and winning, they did not particularly care who was giving them. Orders were orders, power was power, results were results. But Wyyrlock knew this comfortable situation would not last, could not last. Lies never do. They are like microscopic cracks in transparent steel. Small at first, easy to ignore or overlook. But over time, they grow, they spread. The structure weakens, and eventually, catastrophically, everything shatters at once. He had to be extraordinarily careful. Every word he spoke in Krayt's name had to feel authentic. Every gesture had to be something Krayt would have done. Every decision had to be something Krayt might have chosen. Not Wyyrlock pretending to be Krayt, not an imitation or impression, but perfect mimicry, channeling, becoming. So Wyyrlock studied obsessively. He went back through the archives and reviewed every speech Krayt had ever given, every tactical briefing, every strategic document. He analyzed the patterns, the rhythms of speech, the way Krayt constructed arguments, the kinds of metaphors he used, the way he balanced inspiration with intimidation. He learned the way Krayt thought, the underlying philosophy that drove every decision, the hierarchy of values, the strategic principles that governed tactical choices. And slowly, methodically, deliberately, he became Krayt. Not in appearance. The Sith Lords never saw Krayt's physical form anymore. He was always in his chambers, they were told. Always in deep meditation, always communing with dark side entities beyond their comprehension. And Wyyrlock was his voice, his hand, his will made manifest. And it worked, frighteningly well. For months, then years. The war continued to go well. Coruscant fell after a brilliantly executed campaign. The Jedi were scattered to the galactic winds, their temple destroyed, their order broken. The Galactic Alliance collapsed into regional factions, too concerned with their own survival to mount coordinated resistance. And the One Sith Empire stood triumphant, controlling more territory than any Sith polity had controlled in 1,000 years. But Wyyrlock felt the weight of it increasing every single day, every decision, every lie, every moment of pretending to be someone he was not. Because ruling an empire was nothing like studying governance from ancient texts. It was not theoretical. It was not philosophical. It was real and brutal and relentless. Every day brought new problems, new crises, new threats, assassination attempts, betrayals, logistical nightmares, jurisdictional disputes between ambitious Sith Lords, rebellions that needed to be crushed, systems that needed to be pacified. And every single day, Wyyrlock had to decide how to handle them. Not as himself, but as Krayt. What would Krayt do? What would Krayt say? How would Krayt solve this problem? And increasingly, disturbingly, the answers did not come easily or naturally. Because Krayt had been a warrior at heart, a man who believed in action and decisive force, in dominating enemies through overwhelming strength, in making examples that would terrify others into submission. His instinct was always toward the violent, the spectacular, the demonstration of power. But Wyyrlock was not a warrior. He was a scholar, a manipulator, a keeper of secrets and master of deception. His instincts ran toward patience and misdirection, toward solving problems through careful manipulation rather than brute force, toward achieving objectives through means that left no obvious fingerprints. And the more he ruled, the more he made decisions based on his own judgment rather than trying to channel Krayt's approach, the more he realized something uncomfortable. Krayt's way was not the only way, maybe not even the best way for every situation. There were moments when Wyyrlock made decisions that Krayt would never have made, times when he chose patience over aggression, diplomacy over destruction, allowing a problem to resolve itself rather than intervening directly, building structures and institutions rather than relying on personal charisma and overwhelming force. And those decisions worked. Often they worked better than what Krayt would have done. The Empire stabilized in ways it had not when Krayt was actively leading. The Sith Lords fell into more productive patterns. The war effort became more efficient and sustainable. But with every deviation from Krayt's methods, Wyyrlock moved further from the man he was supposed to be channeling, and closer to being himself, to ruling according to his own philosophy and judgment. And that terrified him on multiple levels. Because if he was not following Krayt's vision anymore, if he was implementing his own ideas instead, then what was he doing? Was he preserving the legacy or rewriting it? Was he honoring Krayt's memory or betraying everything the man had stood for? He did not know, and that uncertainty ate at him like acid, slowly corroding his sense of purpose and righteousness. The Sith Lords began to notice the change, not consciously, not in any way they could articulate, but in the way people notice when something familiar becomes subtly different, when a voice sounds slightly wrong, when a trusted figure starts making choices that feel out of character. They did not confront Wyyrlock directly. The power dynamics made that impossible, and none of them were certain enough of their suspicions to risk open challenge. But the whispers began, quiet at first, careful, in the hallways and private chambers. "Have you noticed?" one would say to a trusted ally. "Noticed what?" "Krayt. The way Wyyrlock speaks for him. It seems different lately." "Different how?" "I cannot quite define it. The decisions are still sound, often brilliant, but they do not feel like Krayt. They feel like someone else. He is in deep meditation. Wyyrlock has told us this. He communes with the dark side at levels we cannot comprehend. For over a year now, with no direct appearance, no direct communication to anyone except Wyyrlock. Wyyrlock is his voice, his chosen instrument. Is he, or is Wyyrlock simply using Krayt's name and authority to rule in his own right? The seed was planted in multiple minds simultaneously, and once planted, it began to grow and spread and intertwine with other doubts. Wyyrlock felt the shift in the political atmosphere, the increasing tension and suspicion, and he knew he had to act decisively, to reinforce the illusion before it cracked beyond repair. So he staged something unprecedented. He called all the senior Sith Lords to the main hall, and told them that Krayt had reached out through the Force with a vision, a prophecy, a message of vital importance for the future of the Empire. And Wyyrlock stood before hundreds of the most powerful dark side users in the galaxy, feeling their attention focused on him like the weight of a star. And he spoke, not as himself, but as Krayt, channeling everything he had learned about the man, using the Force to enhance his voice, to make it resonate with power and authority. He spoke of the future, of the final victory that was within reach, of the galaxy united under Sith rule. All conflict and chaos finally ended, of the Jedi crushed beyond any possibility of return, of the Force itself bending to Sith will, reshaped into a tool for bringing order to the universe. And the Sith Lords listened, and they wanted to believe, desperately wanted to believe that this was really Krayt speaking through Wyyrlock, that their leader was still present in some transcendent form. And so, they chose to believe, because the alternative was too terrible. But Wyyrlock, speaking words that were entirely his own invention, delivering a message that came from his own strategic thinking rather than any genuine vision or communication with Krayt, felt something crack inside himself. A small fracture, a hairline break in the foundation of his identity. Because in that moment, he was not just lying to the assembled Sith, he was lying to himself, telling himself that this was necessary, that this was for the greater good, that this was what Krayt would have wanted, that he was serving the vision rather than manipulating it. But was he, or was this just Wyyrlock, clinging to power, hiding behind a dead man's name, using the authority of someone else's legacy to implement his own agenda? He did not know anymore, could not tell where Krayt's vision ended and his own began, could not distinguish between preservation and transformation, could not see the line between honoring a legacy and creating something entirely new. And that uncertainty was poison. Doubt is always poison to those who need absolute certainty to function. Late at night, he would stand before the stasis chamber, where Krayt's body lay suspended in medical twilight, neither alive nor dead, just frozen, waiting. And Wyyrlock would speak to him, not aloud, but in his mind, in the silent space where thoughts formed before becoming words. Am I doing this right? He would ask the silent body. Am I preserving your vision or destroying it? Am I the guardian of your legacy or its greatest threat? But there was never an answer, just the mechanical hum of the stasis equipment, the faint glow of dark side energy that kept the body from decaying. The silence of a man who could not speak, could not judge, could not offer guidance or forgiveness. And Wyyrlock would leave feeling more alone than before he arrived. Because that was the truth of ruling, he was learning, the deep truth that no text or teaching had prepared him for. You could stand at the center of an empire. You could be surrounded by thousands, by millions of beings. You could have more power than anyone in the galaxy, and still feel utterly, completely, devastatingly alone. Because nobody could know the truth. Nobody could understand the full weight of what you carried. Nobody could share the burden without becoming a threat. And if they did know, if they did understand, they would kill you for it without hesitation. The months stretched into years. The war continued, the empire grew, and the illusion held, maintained through constant effort and vigilance. But cracks were forming, not just in the political fiction everyone maintained, but in Wyyrlock himself, in his sense of identity and purpose. He was forgetting who he had been, losing himself in the role he played. The mask was fusing to his skin the way Krayt's von armor had fused to his body. He would catch himself thinking in Krayt's cadences, making decisions not based on his own judgment but on what he imagined Krayt would have decided, speaking words that felt foreign in his mouth but necessary for the performance. And he wondered, in those rare moments when he allowed himself genuine introspection, if he wore this mask long enough, would he ever be able to remove it? Would Wyyrlock still exist underneath? Or would he have been completely consumed by the role, transformed into nothing more than an echo of a dead man? He did not know, and increasingly, he was afraid to find out. Because Darth Wyyrlock had been trained since birth to control everything, his emotions, his thoughts, his actions, his destiny. But now, for the first time in his life, he felt like he was losing control. Not to an external enemy or political rival, but to himself, to the lie he was living, to the role he was playing, to the shadow he had become. And deep down, in a place he could not reach anymore, in a space so deeply buried it might as well have been in another dimension, a voice whispered, "You were never meant to rule. You were meant to serve. And now you are neither ruler nor servant. You are just a lie, a ghost, a fiction sustained by will alone. And when the truth finally comes, as it inevitably must, it will destroy you utterly." But Wyyrlock silenced that voice the way he had learned to silence all inconvenient truths. He buried it, locked it away, pretended it did not exist. Because that was what he had been trained to do. That was the only way he knew how to function. Bury the doubt, ignore the fear, maintain the fiction, serve the purpose. And for a time, for months more, it worked well enough. The Empire grew stronger. The Sith Lords continued to follow. The galaxy trembled before the One Sith war machine. But the truth was still there. Patient, inevitable, waiting. And one day soon, it would come for him. And when it did, there would be nowhere to hide, no mask to wear, no lie to tell, no role to play. Just the reckoning, and the terrible silence that would follow. There are places in the galaxy where madness has a name, where the dark side does not whisper suggestions or offer temptations. It screams, it demands, it takes without asking permission. And if you listen too long, if you open yourself to those screams even for a moment, it takes something from you that you can never get back. Something essential, something that defines what it means to be you. Korriban was one of those places. It had always been one of those places, and Darth Wyyrlock was about to return to it. The nightmares had started weeks ago. At first they were vague, barely remembered upon waking, just images, shadows moving at the edge of vision. The feeling of being watched by something that existed just outside normal perception. But over time, through repetition and intensification, they grew stronger, more vivid, more insistent, more impossible to ignore or dismiss. He would see faces in his dreams, twisted and decayed, flesh hanging from bone, eyes that were empty sockets somehow still seeing, mouthing words he could not hear, but somehow understood at a level deeper than language. He would see tombs opening from the inside, ancient seals breaking, hands reaching out from darkness that had existed for millennia, voices calling his name, not in anger or threat, but in invitation, in welcome. "Come home," they seemed to say, the words bypassing his ears and speaking directly to something deeper. "Come back to where it all began. Come back to where you were forged. Come back and see what you have become." Wyyrlock tried to ignore them at first, tried to push them away using all the mental discipline he had cultivated over decades. He knew these were not just random nightmares. They were sendings, communications through the Force from something old and powerful and very, very dangerous. But the dark side does not ask permission. It does not respect boundaries or mental shields. It simply takes what it wants, and the more he resisted, the more he tried to block them out, the louder and more insistent the voices became. They invaded his waking thoughts. He would be in the middle of a council meeting and suddenly see faces in the shadows, would be reviewing tactical reports and hear whispers underneath the words, would look at himself in reflective surfaces and see something else looking back, something that wore his face but was not him, something that had been waiting for him his entire life. Until one night, he woke in his chambers drenched in sweat despite the cold, his heart pounding like a war drum, every nerve screaming. And he knew with absolute certainty that came from somewhere beyond rational thought. Something was calling him, something ancient and terrible and intimately connected to his bloodline. And if he did not answer, if he did not go to meet it, it would not stop. It would drive him mad slowly and methodically, until there was nothing left of Darth Wyyrlock except a screaming shell. So he made the decision. He would return to Korriban, alone, without guards or escorts or any official explanation. He simply left the fortress in the dead of night when the fortress was as close to sleeping as it ever got, boarded a nondescript ship from the private hangar, and set course for the world where he had been born. The dead world, the tomb world, the place where the Sith had been burying their greatest and most terrible for thousands of years. The place where, he suspected with growing certainty, he might die. The journey was long, silent, lonely in ways that had nothing to do with being physically alone. And the closer he got to Korriban, the stronger the pull became. It was not a vision or a dream or even a voice anymore. It was something more fundamental, like a string wrapped around his soul, tied to something at the core of his being, pulling him forward inexorably. Like gravity, like fate. When his ship finally broke through the atmosphere and descended toward the Valley of the Dark Lords, the world greeted him with silence. Not peaceful silence, not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that feels actively hostile, that presses down on you, that makes every breath feel like an intrusion, that makes you hyper-aware of your own heartbeat and mortality. Korriban had not changed. The temples still stood where they had always stood, broken and forgotten by anyone except those who sought dark knowledge. The tombs still gaped open like wounds in the red earth. The wind still howled through the valleys, carrying voices that might have been wind or might have been something else. The sky was the same perpetual rust color he remembered from childhood. But something was different. The air felt heavier somehow, thicker, harder to breathe, like the dark side itself had grown denser, more concentrated. Like the world was waiting for something specific to happen, or for someone specific to arrive. Wyyrlock walked through the ruins he had known as a child, not toward the temple where he had been raised, where his father had forged him into a weapon, but toward something else, something older and deeper, a place he had been warned about repeatedly but never actually entered, a place that even his father, who feared nothing in the galaxy, had spoken of with something approaching respect or possibly dread. The Pit of Wyyrlock, the Mad. It was not a tomb in the traditional sense. It was a prison, a place where the Sith of ages past had sealed away one of their own. Not because he was weak, weakness they would have simply killed, but because he was too dangerous, too unstable, too consumed by the dark side to be allowed to walk free, but too knowledgeable and potentially useful to simply execute. Wyyrlock the Mad was a legend, a cautionary tale, a ghost story that Sith told their apprentices to illustrate what happened when you let the dark side take complete control. When you stopped using the Force as a tool and became the tool instead. He had been a scholar once, according to the fragments of records that survived, a keeper of secrets, a member of the Wyyrlock bloodline in some distant generation. But he had gone too far, delved too deep into forbidden knowledge, listened too long to whispers that should have been ignored, performed rituals that should never have been attempted. And the dark side had broken him, shattered his mind and remade him into something that was no longer Sith or even really human. Just madness given form and focus. Just hunger and hate and fractured consciousness held together by dark side energy. And now that madness was calling Wyyrlock home, calling him to account, calling him to witness something. He found the entrance after an hour of searching, a narrow crack in the stone hidden beneath centuries of accumulated dust and debris. It led down, steeply down, into the heart of the world, into darkness that no light had touched in generations. Wyyrlock did not hesitate. He had come too far, been pulled too strongly to turn back now. He descended into the crack, using the Force to navigate when even his enhanced senses failed in the absolute darkness. The passage was tight, claustrophobic, the walls pressed in from both sides. The ceiling scraped against his back. The air grew colder with each step down, colder than should have been possible this deep in a desert world. Harder and harder to breathe, the air thick with something that was not quite gas or liquid but had properties of both. And the voices grew louder, so much louder. Not words anymore, not even recognizable sounds, just noise, whispers and screams and laughter and sobbing all blending together into a cacophony of insanity. The collected madness of thousands of years of dark side corruption concentrated in one place. Most people would have turned back. Most people would have run screaming back to the surface. Most Sith would have recognized the danger and retreated to safety. But Wyyrlock kept going. Because he had to. Because something was waiting. Because he suspected that the answers he needed, the truth he had been avoiding, lay at the bottom of this pit. And then, finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the narrow passage opened into a chamber. Vast and cavernous, carved from the living rock by techniques and tools that had been forgotten millennia ago. And at its center, chained to the floor with restraints that glowed faintly with Sith runes of binding and suppression, was a figure. Wyyrlock the Mad. He was not what Wyyrlock expected, not a monster, though monster would have been easier somehow. Not a beast or demon or manifestation of pure evil. Just a man, an old man, ancient beyond calculation. His skin was withered and hanging loose on bones that seemed too fragile to support even that minimal weight. His eyes were milky white with cataracts, or perhaps something worse. His breath came in shallow rasps. His body was motionless except for the slight rise and fall of his chest. He looked like a corpse that had been dead for years but somehow continued to breathe out of habit or perhaps curse. But when Wyyrlock stepped into the chamber, when his foot crossed the threshold of that ancient prison, those blind eyes snapped open, and they saw, not with physical sight, which was clearly long gone, but with something else, something deeper and far more terrible. "Ah," the Mad One rasped, his voice like dry leaves crumbling. The air returns. The cycle continues. The wheel turns, and we all return to where we began. Wyyrlock said nothing. He simply stood there, hand resting on the hilt of his lightsaber, ready for anything. The Mad One laughed. It was a terrible sound, brittle and broken, like bones snapping. "You think you can fight me?" he said, genuine amusement in his ruined voice. You think your lightsaber, or your powers, or your training can stop what is coming. You are a fool, boy. Just like your father before you. Just like all of them stretching back through generations. Fools who think they control the dark side when it is the dark side that controls them. Always, forever. I did not come here to fight, Wyyrlock said carefully, keeping his voice steady. I came because you called me, because you reached out through the Force and would not let me rest. Did I call you? The Mad One tilted his head, the movement somehow wrong, at an angle that should not have been possible for a living neck. Or did you come because you are afraid? Because you know what you are becoming and you cannot stop it, and you want someone to tell you it will be all right. That there is a way out of the trap you have built for yourself. Wyyrlock's jaw tightened. His hand gripped the lightsaber hilt harder. The Mad One smiled, a twisted, broken smile that revealed teeth that should not have been in a human mouth. You feel it, do not you? He said, his blind eyes somehow meeting Wyyrlock's perfectly, the weight growing heavier every day. The doubt spreading like poison. The fear that you are losing yourself, that you are becoming something you do not recognize, something you cannot control. You wear a mask, and the mask is wearing you, and you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. You know nothing about me, Wyyrlock said, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. I know everything about you. The Mad One replied, and his voice became stronger, clearer, terrible in its certainty, because I was you. Once, long ago, before time and madness stripped away everything except truth. I was a keeper of secrets, a shadow behind the throne, a liar who believed his lies were necessary, a manipulator who thought he was serving a greater purpose, and I thought I was strong. I thought I was in control. I thought I was using the dark side as a tool, until the day I realized the truth that all Sith eventually realize if they live long enough. And what truth is that? Wyyrlock asked, though part of him did not want to know the answer. The Mad One leaned forward as far as his chains would allow, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. That there is no control, there is no mastery, there is no using the dark side. There is only the dark side, and it does not serve you. You serve it. You think you are wielding power, but you are the one being wielded. You think you are shaping events, but you are the one being shaped. And one day, inevitably, absolutely, it will consume you. Just like it consumed me. Just like it consumes everyone who dares to think they are its master. Wyyrlock stared at him, silent, because part of him knew, part of him had always known. Part of him had been screaming this truth for years, but he had buried it so deep he could pretend it did not exist. You are not here for wisdom, the Mad One continued, his blind eyes boring into Wyyrlock's soul. You are here because you are desperate, because the lie you are living is cracking. Because you know that when it finally breaks, and it will break, there will be nothing left. No empire, no legacy, no purpose, no you. Just fragments and regret and the terrible realization that everything you sacrificed, everything you gave up, everything you became, was for nothing. Then tell me, Wyyrlock said, and his voice was harder now, edged with something dangerous. What do I do? How do I stop it? How do I prevent what you are describing? The Mad One laughed again, louder this time. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder, like judgment, like the laughter of the universe itself at mortal pretension. You cannot stop it, he said, and there was something almost like pity in his voice now. You can only choose how you fall. Will you fall with some shred of dignity intact? Will you admit the truth and face the consequences? Or will you cling to the lie until the very end, until it drags you down into darkness, so complete that even madness like mine will seem like mercy? Wyyrlock's hand tightened on his lightsaber hilt. His mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him to do something, to act, to take control of this situation. And then, without fully deciding to do it, without conscious thought or plan, he ignited his lightsaber. The blade hummed to life, red, bright, cutting through the darkness of the pit like a laser through smoke. The Mad One's smile widened into something that was not quite human. "Yes," he whispered. "Good. Finally. Finally, you understand what must be done." "What must be done?" Wyyrlock asked, though he already knew the answer. "Kill the dreamer," the Mad One said softly, almost lovingly. "End the lie you are living. Let the Empire burn if it must. Let the vision fail if that is its destiny. Stop trying to carry the weight of the galaxy on your shoulders. Stop pretending you are something you are not. Stop, 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 just stop. Because the only thing worse than failure is success that costs you everything you are." Wyyrlock stared at him, at this broken remnant of what a Wyyrlock could become, at this cautionary tale made flesh, at this possible future version of himself. And he made his choice. He struck, fast, clean, decisive. The lightsaber moved almost of its own accord, guided by training and instinct and maybe something deeper. And the Mad One's head separated from his shoulders and fell to the stone floor with a sound like a ripe fruit splitting. There was no scream, no struggle, no final words of wisdom or curse, just silence. The body slumped in its chains. The blind eyes stared at nothing. And slowly, very slowly, the ancient corpse began to decay, flesh turning to dust in moments, bones crumbling, until there was nothing left but empty chains and echoes. And Wyyrlock stood there in the darkness of the pit, his blade still ignited and humming, his breath coming hard, his hands trembling slightly. He had killed the Mad One, silenced the warning, destroyed the mirror that showed him his possible future. But the voices did not stop. The whispers did not fade. The darkness did not retreat. Because the Mad One had been right about one thing, at least. The dark side did not care about intentions or choices or morality. It simply waited. Patient, eternal, inevitable. And as Wyyrlock climbed back up through the narrow passage, back toward the surface, back toward the light, and the empire and the lie he was living, he knew with terrible certainty. One day he would return to this darkness. One day he would become the thing he had just killed. One day the lie would consume him so completely that there would be nothing left to save. But not today. Not yet. Today, he was still Darth Wyyrlock. Today, he was still in control, or at least could maintain the fiction of control. Today, he still had a choice, or at least could tell himself he did. Even if that choice was itself a lie. Even if everything was lies built on lies, all the way down to the foundation of his soul. He emerged from the pit as the red sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, and he walked back to his ship without looking back, without acknowledging what he had done or what he had learned. And he returned to the Empire, to the throne that was not his, to the mask he wore constantly, to the lie that defined every moment of his existence. Because that was all he had left, the lie, the role, the performance. And he would play it until the end, whatever that end might be. Power is a strange thing. It does not feel like strength the way people imagine. It does not feel like triumph or control or mastery. It feels like drowning, slowly drowning. One breath at a time, water rising incrementally, each breath slightly harder than the last. And by the time you realize you are sinking, by the time you understand that you are too deep to surface, you are already gone, already claimed by the depths. Darth Wyyrlock was drowning. It had been months since his return from Korriban, months since he had descended into that pit and confronted the Mad One. Months since he had killed what might have been a warning or a prophecy or simply a broken remnant of his own bloodline. And in that time, nothing had gotten better. If anything, everything had gotten worse. The Empire continued to grow stronger by every measurable metric. The Sith continued their conquest of the galaxy. Territory expanded, resistance crumbled. The machinery of government functioned with increasing efficiency. And the lie that held it all together, the fiction that Darth Krayt still lived and ruled, continued to hold. But only just, only barely, only through constant vigilance and effort and the application of every technique of deception Wyyrlock had ever learned. The Sith Lords were growing restless in ways that were becoming harder and harder to ignore or manage. They did not speak of their doubts openly. No one was foolish enough to voice direct suspicion where it might be overheard or reported. But Wyyrlock could feel it, could sense it in the way they looked at him, in the way they hesitated fractionally before following his commands, in the way they whispered among themselves when they thought he was not listening. They were beginning to question, beginning to doubt, beginning to wonder if the emperor they served actually existed or if they had been following a ghost, a fiction, a lie maintained by an ambitious lawkeeper who had seized power in Krayt's absence. Where is Krayt? The unspoken question hung in every council meeting, every strategic briefing, every interaction. Why does he not appear? Why does he only speak through Wyyrlock? Why has no one seen him in over 2 years? How long can a meditation last? How long can communion with the dark side continue without any direct manifestation? And the more they questioned internally, the harder Wyyrlock had to work to maintain the illusion. He crafted more visions, claiming to receive them directly from Krayt's expanded consciousness. He staged more elaborate rituals. He invoked the dark side in increasingly dramatic ways. He did everything he could think of to make them believe, to keep them invested in the fiction. But belief is fragile. It requires constant reinforcement, and doubt, once it takes root, is almost impossible to completely eradicate. It spreads like a virus, infecting mind after mind, growing stronger with each transmission. And Wyyrlock could feel it spreading throughout the Empire like a disease he could not cure. The first open challenge came during a major council meeting. All the senior Sith Lords were present, dozens of the most powerful dark side users in the galaxy assembled in one chamber. The meeting was supposed to be about military strategy, about the next phase of conquest, routine, procedural. And then Darth Strife stood. He was a warrior, battle-scarred and direct, not given to political maneuvering or subtle manipulation, which made what he did next all the more dangerous. "We have followed Krayt's will without question," Strife said, his voice cutting through the discussions like a vibroblade through flesh. "We have conquered worlds. We have crushed the Jedi. We have brought half the galaxy to its knees. But it has been over 2 years since we have seen him. Over 2 years since he has walked among us or addressed us directly. And I believe it is time we ask the question that none of us have dared to ask." The chamber fell completely silent. Every eye turned to Strife. Then, slowly, inexorably, to Wyyrlock. This was the moment, the confrontation, the challenge to the fundamental fiction upon which everything was built. "What question?" Wyyrlock asked, and his voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, giving away nothing. Strife met his gaze directly, unflinching, and asked the question that everyone had been thinking. "Is Darth Krayt still alive?" The words hung in the air like a suspended blade, sharp, cutting, impossible to ignore or deflect. Wyyrlock did not flinch, did not hesitate, did not show any sign of the panic that was flooding through his mind beneath the carefully maintained surface. He had been trained for this, prepared for this. He had known from the very beginning that this moment would eventually come. He just had not expected it to hurt quite so much, had not expected to feel so exposed, so vulnerable, so alone. "Darth Krayt is alive," Wyyrlock said, and his voice carried through the chamber with certainty and power. "He is in deep meditation, communing with the dark side at levels we cannot comprehend, preparing for the final phase of our conquest, gathering knowledge and power from sources beyond our understanding. To disturb him now, to pull him back from this work prematurely, would risk everything we have built, everything we have sacrificed for." "Then let us see him," Strife said, and there was steel in his voice now. "Let him speak to us directly. Let him appear before us even briefly. Let him prove that he still lives and still leads us." Wyyrlock's mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. He could feel the attention of everyone in the chamber focused on this exchange, could feel the balance of power shifting based on how he handled this challenge. He could not show weakness, could not show doubt, could not let them see the crack in the mask. "You doubt Lord Krayt's will?" Wyyrlock asked, and his voice became cold, dangerous, edged with implicit threat. "You question his methods, his wisdom, his judgment in choosing how to guide us?" "I doubt nothing," Strife replied, but there was the slightest edge of uncertainty now. "I simply seek confirmation, clarity, truth." "The truth," Wyyrlock said slowly, letting each word carry weight, "is that Darth Krayt has chosen me to act in his stead. To be his voice in the material world while he operates on planes of existence we cannot access. To carry his will forward. To lead in his physical absence. He has judged me worthy of this responsibility. And if you cannot accept that, if you cannot trust his judgment or my authority, then perhaps you do not belong in this council. Perhaps you do not truly understand what we are building or why we are building it." It was a gamble, a calculated risk, turning the challenge back on the challenger, making doubt itself seem like the betrayal rather than the reasonable response to obvious questions. Strife's jaw tightened. For a moment, it seemed like he might press further, might draw his weapon and demand satisfaction, might turn this political challenge into physical confrontation. But he did not, because even through his doubts, even through his suspicions, he could feel something, the weight of the dark side that surrounded Wyyrlock, the power that radiated from him. Not necessarily Wyyrlock's own power, but the accumulated authority of the role he played, the office he held, the fiction that had become so real that it exerted its own gravitational pull. Strife bowed his head, slightly, reluctantly, resentfully. "As you command," he said, and the words tasted like poison in his mouth. And the moment passed, the challenge deflected, the fiction maintained for another day. But Wyyrlock knew. The seed had been planted in dozens of minds simultaneously. The doubt had been given voice, and it would only grow from here. That night, Wyyrlock stood alone in the council chamber, long after everyone else had departed, stood staring at the empty throne, the throne that Krayt should have been occupying, the throne that belonged to no one now, or to everyone, or to a ghost. He felt profoundly, devastatingly tired, not physically. He could push his body beyond its limits using the Force if necessary, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the weight of the lie was crushing him, grinding him down, eroding his sense of self like water eroding stone. He thought about the Mad One's words, about letting the Empire burn, about ending the lie, about choosing how to fall rather than clinging until the bitter end. And for a moment, for one terrible tempting moment, he considered it, considered walking into the council chamber tomorrow and telling them the truth, that Krayt was effectively dead, that he had been ruling in his place for years, that the entire empire had been built on a convenient fiction. But he knew what would happen. The empire would not accept the truth gracefully. It would not transition smoothly to new leadership. It would tear itself apart. The Sith Lords would turn on each other within hours. Old rivalries and ambitions that had been suppressed under Krayt's authority would explode into violence. The Jedi would seize the opportunity. The Republic would reform. And everything that had been accomplished, all the sacrifice and effort and transformation, would be lost. And Wyyrlock could not allow that to happen, not after coming so far, not after sacrificing so much, not after giving up so much of himself that he was not even sure what would be left if he stopped playing this role. So he buried the doubt one more time, pushed it down into that deep dark place where he kept all the truths he could not afford to acknowledge, and told himself he was strong, told himself he was in control, told himself he could carry this weight a little longer. Just a little longer, just until the Empire was stable enough, just until the transition could be managed properly. But the voices did not stop. They came at night now, every night, when he was alone, when the fortress was as quiet as it ever got, when the mask came off, and the performance ended, and he was just himself, whoever that was anymore. They were not the voices of the dead from Korriban. They were his own voices, the parts of himself he had buried, the fragments of identity he had sacrificed, the pieces of soul he had traded away for power and purpose. And they whispered truths he could not ignore. You are not strong. You are weak and getting weaker. You are not in control. You are being controlled by the lie you created. You are not Wyyrlock anymore. You are not Krayt. You are nothing. Just a fiction. Just a performance with no performer left. And he would lie awake in his chambers, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if they were right. Had he lost himself completely? Was there anything left of the person he had been? Or had he become so completely consumed by the role that there was no separation anymore? He did not know, could not know, because to examine the question too closely was to risk the answer, and the answer might be unbearable. The days began to blur together into an endless cycle of performance and management and crisis control. The war continued. The Sith Lords followed his commands, though with increasing reluctance and skepticism. And the Empire grew. But Wyyrlock felt himself shrinking, diminishing, fading, becoming smaller and smaller, until he was nothing but a voice, a mask, an echo. And then, one day, something changed, something that would bring everything crashing down. A transmission arrived, from the outer reaches of the galaxy, from a place Wyyrlock thought had been thoroughly searched and confirmed empty, from a source he had believed was impossible. Darth Krayt. Not a recording, not a message left before his coma, but a live transmission, recent, current. Wyyrlock stared at the message with hands that trembled no matter how much he tried to control them. His heart pounded in his chest like it was trying to escape. His mind raced through implications and impossibilities. It was not possible. Krayt was in stasis. Wyyrlock had checked the chamber regularly. The body was still there, still preserved, still suspended in medical twilight. But the transmission was real. The Force signature was unmistakable. The voice was genuine. And the message was simple, direct, terrifying in its brevity. I am returning. I am coming home. Prepare for my arrival. Wyyrlock's blood ran cold in his veins. His breath caught in his throat. Every carefully constructed plan, every contingency he had developed, every strategy for maintaining control suddenly felt inadequate. Because he knew with absolute certainty what this meant. Krayt had returned somehow, impossibly, against all reason and expectation. The Master had come back from whatever realm he had been exploring. And when he arrived, when he saw what Wyyrlock had done, when he discovered the empire that had been built in his name, when he learned about the lies and deceptions and manipulations, he would render judgment. And Wyyrlock knew with terrible certainty that there would be no mercy, no forgiveness, no understanding or appreciation for what had been necessary. There would only be reckoning, final and absolute. And as Wyyrlock stood there staring at the message, as the reality of his situation crashed down on him like a collapsing building, he realized something fundamental about himself and his position. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, training for it, shaped by it. Everything had been leading to this confrontation. But now that it was here, now that it was real and immediate and unavoidable, he was not ready, would never be ready, could never be ready. Because the truth was simple and devastating. He had not saved the Empire or preserved Krayt's vision or honored the legacy he had been given. He had simply delayed the inevitable, postponed the reckoning, bought time at the cost of his own soul. And now the bill was due, and payment would be extracted in full. And there was nowhere left to hide, nowhere to run, nothing to do but wait and see what form his destruction would take. The dragon was returning, and the liar who had worn his crown would burn. There are moments when the galaxy holds its breath, when the Force itself seems to pause in its eternal flow. When everything that came before, every choice and sacrifice and compromise, leads inexorably to a single point in space and time. A convergence, a reckoning, a moment when all debts must be paid and all lies must be answered for. This was that moment. Darth Krayt had returned. Not as a vision or a Force ghost or a message transmitted across light years, but as flesh and blood, as a physical presence, alive in ways that should not have been possible. Impossibly, undeniably, terrifyingly alive. He arrived without warning, without advance notice, without any of the ceremony or preparation that should have accompanied the return of an emperor. One moment, the fortress was conducting its normal operations. The next, the air itself seemed to scream. The dark side surged like a tidal wave. The walls trembled, every light flickered, and every single Sith in the entire complex felt it simultaneously. A presence, massive, overwhelming, ancient and terrible and familiar. The dragon had awakened from his long sleep. Wyyrlock was in the council chamber when it happened, reviewing strategic reports, maintaining the fiction of command. He felt the disturbance before he understood what it meant. Felt it like a physical blow to his chest, like a cold hand closing around his heart. like the weight of an entire planet settling on his shoulders all at once. And then he knew, with absolute certainty that came from deep connection through the Force and years of proximity. Krayt. It was Krayt, and he was here, in the fortress, perhaps already inside the building. The council chamber doors opened, not slowly or ceremoniously. They simply opened, pushed by a gesture so casual it barely registered as Force use. And Darth Krayt walked in. He looked different from the dying man Wyyrlock remembered. Fundamentally, impossibly different. The Yuuzhan Vong coral armor that had been consuming him, killing him slowly, was gone. Burned away or removed through means Wyyrlock could not begin to guess. His body was still heavily scarred, marked by a century of violence and dark side corruption, but it was whole, functional, strong in ways it had not been in years. He had died, or come as close to death as made no difference. And whatever had brought him back, whatever ritual or power or dark miracle had accomplished this resurrection, it had changed him, transformed him, made him into something more than he had been. He was no longer a man desperately clinging to life through sheer will and alchemy. He was a force of nature, a god made flesh, a living manifestation of dark side power so intense it distorted reality around him. His eyes burned with intelligence and awareness, and something that might have been fury or might have been certainty. They swept across the chamber, taking in everything, analyzing and judging. And they locked onto Wyyrlock. The room fell silent. Everyone who had been present froze. Every eye turned to watch this confrontation between Master and Shadow, between Emperor and Regent, between the man who had created the Empire and the man who had maintained it in his absence. Krayt did not speak immediately. He simply walked forward. Each step was deliberate, controlled, powerful. Each movement contained absolute confidence. The distance closed between them, meter by meter, until he stood only a few paces away from Wyyrlock. And then, finally, he spoke. His voice was exactly as Wyyrlock remembered. Deep, resonant, carrying weight and authority that made the air itself vibrate. "You have done well." The words were completely unexpected. Wyyrlock had prepared himself for rage, for accusation, for immediate violence. But instead, there was only this calm acknowledgement. "My lord," Wyyrlock began, but Krayt raised one hand and the words died in his throat. "I know what you have done," Krayt said, and his eyes never left Wyyrlock's face. "I know you spoke in my name, ruled in my place, wore my authority like a cloak, issued commands and made decisions and shaped the Empire according to your judgment. I know all of it." He took another step closer, and Wyyrlock could feel the power radiating from him now, could feel the dark side responding to his presence like iron to a magnet. "And I know why you did it," Krayt continued. "You did it to preserve what I built, to maintain the vision when I could not, to ensure that when I returned, if I returned, there would still be something worth returning to. You sacrificed yourself to protect something larger than yourself." He placed a hand on Wyyrlock's shoulder, and Wyyrlock felt something break inside himself. Some final barrier, some last defense. It shattered under the weight of that simple gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps something that might have been respect or even gratitude. "You were always the most loyal of my servants," Krayt said quietly, and there was something in his voice that might have been genuine emotion. "Not because you loved me, we Sith do not love, but because you understood. You understood that the vision was greater than any individual, greater than me, greater than you, greater than any of us. and you were willing to sacrifice everything, including your own identity, to protect it. He withdrew his hand and turned to face the assembled Sith Lords who had been watching this exchange in stunned silence. "I am Darth Krayt," he declared, and his voice filled the chamber, filled the fortress, maybe filled the Force itself. "I have walked through death and returned. I have journeyed to places beyond your comprehension and brought back knowledge that will reshape everything. I have been reborn in the fires of the dark side itself, and I will lead you to final victory, not as I was before, weak and dying, but as I am now, stronger, more powerful, more certain than ever before." The Sith Lords knelt, one by one, not out of fear, though there was certainly fear present, but out of awe, out of relief, out of the sheer, overwhelming presence of power that made denial or resistance feel impossible. They had seen the impossible. Their emperor had returned from death, and whatever came next would be greater than anything that had come before. And Wyyrlock stood there, watching this, feeling the shift in power and authority and legitimacy happening in real time. He had been replaced, not violently, not cruelly, but completely and utterly. The shadow had served its purpose. The regent's time was over. And now, the true emperor had returned to reclaim what was rightfully his. Krayt turned back to Wyyrlock, and for a moment, just a moment, there was something in his eyes that might have been pity, or might have been understanding, or might have been something else entirely. "You have my gratitude," Krayt said. "You kept the flame burning when I could not. You carried the burden when I was unable. For that, you have earned your place in history. But gratitude is not enough, and history is not mercy." He paused. Let the silence stretch. Let the implications sink in. "You have worn my name," Krayt continued. "You have spoken with my voice. You have ruled with my authority. And in doing so, you have committed the greatest betrayal, not against me. I understand why you did what you did, but against yourself." Wyyrlock's breath caught, because he knew. He knew what Krayt was going to say before the words were spoken. "You have lost yourself," Krayt said, and his voice was not angry but almost sad. "You have become the lie you were living. You have spent so long pretending to be me that you have forgotten how to be you. And now you stand before me, and I can see it in your eyes. You do not know who you are anymore. Do not know what is real and what is performance. Do not know where Wyyrlock ends and Krayt begins." He ignited his lightsaber. The blade sprang to life with a hiss and a crackle. Red, burning, inevitable. And Wyyrlock understood. This was not punishment, this was mercy. Because Krayt, who had lived for over a century and understood the dark side's corruptions better than anyone, knew what Wyyrlock had become. Knew that he was broken beyond repair. Knew that there was nothing left to save. And the kindest thing, the most merciful thing, was to end it cleanly, quickly, to spare him the slow descent into madness that would come otherwise. Wyyrlock did not draw his own weapon, did not prepare to fight, did not even flinch. He simply closed his eyes and waited for the end that he had been waiting for, consciously or unconsciously, for years. But the killing blow did not come. Instead, Krayt deactivated his lightsaber, and when Wyyrlock opened his eyes in confusion, he saw something unexpected on the Emperor's face. "No," Krayt said quietly, "not like this. You do not deserve a quick death. You deserve something else. Something worse and better at the same time." He turned away, and his voice became iron. "You will live," Krayt declared. "You will watch as I rebuild what needs rebuilding. You will see me finish what we started. You will witness the completion of the vision with your own eyes. And you will know with absolute certainty that the lie was never necessary, that I would have returned regardless, that the vision would have survived without your deceptions. And you will carry that knowledge for the rest of your days. He walked toward the exit. The Sith Lords parted before him like waves before a ship. You gave me years of your life, Krayt said without looking back. You sacrificed yourself completely. For that, I grant you continued existence. Use it to reflect on what you have become. Use it to understand the price of the choices you made. Use it to learn what I have already learned through death and rebirth. That the individual is nothing. The vision is everything. And martyrdom is easier than living with what you have done. And then he was gone. The Sith Lords followed him, eager to be near their returned emperor, eager to bask in his presence and power. And Wyyrlock stood alone in the council chamber, alone with the empty throne and the weight of everything he had done and everything he had become. And he fell to his knees, not out of weakness, but because he had finally understood. The Mad One had been right. The dark side does not serve, it consumes, and Wyyrlock had given everything to it. His identity, his soul, his very self. And for what? To preserve a lie, to wear a mask, to become nothing while pretending to be everything. He had not saved the Empire, had not honored Krayt's legacy, had not accomplished anything, except delaying the inevitable while destroying himself in the process. And now there was no going back, no redemption, no possibility of recovering what he had lost. Just silence, and wait, and the knowledge that he had failed, not as a Sith, which would have been acceptable, but as a person, as a being, as anything that could claim to have meaning or value or purpose. And that was the cruelest truth of all, the truth that would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. He had succeeded in his mission. The Empire had survived. The vision had persisted. But he himself had been destroyed utterly in the process. And there was no coming back from that, no resurrection for shadows, no rebirth for those who had given up their very identity. Just existence, hollow, empty, meaningless. The reckoning had come, and the price had been everything.